Hi there. Thanks for clicking on my video. Today, you will be listening to Dao of Money by Extra 26. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It would be much appreciated.
Chapter 1. I'm a young master. The moment Tang Xiaolan's broom touched the dry cobblestone tiles, a piercing, frustrated scream resounded through the courtyard. A jolt of fear shot up her arms as she clutched the barren wooden handle tighter, her blisters rubbing against its coarse surface while she pulled up the broom away from the tile. Soon enough, her fright was replaced with confusion, her eyes locked on the dust-covered bristles that had been the same for the last 3 years. She shook herself out of her stupor and continued to sweep, but instead another scream erupted once more the very moment the bristle touched the tile. A sharp thud of an object hitting the floor followed it. She lifted the broom up high, inspecting the head. Strange. Did the master change all the brooms to elicit screams and sounds? However, despite her broom's bristles not touching the tiles, another loud noise came out loud and clear. A scream of pain followed it, as if someone had fallen on the ground and hit their head hard. Tang Xiaolan finally located the source of the disturbance. But instead of investigating any further, she decided to keep her head down, sweeping quickly while ignoring the repeated screams of pain and frustration. A few minutes passed, and the screams finally died down until the morning was as silent as ever. Footsteps approached her rapidly from behind, the click-clack of slippers knocking against moldy wooden panels shocking Tang Xiaolan into alertness. She spun on her heel, her body preparing to lock into a submissive bow when she finally saw who was coming towards her. Tang Xiaolan relaxed her guard, returning to her usual self while crossing her covered arms in exasperation, the loose pale blue robe accented with silver cranes flapping gently in the wind. "What are you doing here, trying to skive off work again? Do you even want to continue working as a maid?" She chided the young woman with flabby cheeks that looked barely an adult. "What are you talking about, Sister Tang?" The other maid looked aghast. "I heard a terrible scream. It sounded like someone was dying in one of the guest rooms. Is young Master Chen Ren okay?" Tang Xiaolan rolled her eyes, knowing fully well why she was worried. "Don't worry about him. There's nothing we can do for him. Master already gave him the best mortal healer in the city. But still, and even the healer said only the heavens can decide his fate now. If he dies, then at least the guest room could be open for other, important guests. It's already a miracle that he woke up and was able to let out those screams, but he seemed to have gone back to sleep since it's so silent." Tang Xiaolan swept her long black hair back behind her ears, returning to her sweeping tasks. The other maid frowned and looked like she wanted to argue, but she held it in. She hurriedly walked up to the guest room where the screams were coming from, the same robe, uniform trailing her feet. She tried to peep in through a gap in the sliding wooden panels before returning. "Looks like he's still up, just going through one of his books and clenching his fist. Young Master Chen Ren seems pretty frustrated. Hey, why do you care so much about him? Do you really think he would make you his concubine just because he talks sweetly with you? You need to know your status and let him be. Nothing good comes out of getting involved with a cultivator, especially one with such a bad reputation." Tang Xiaolan snarled, saying the last part in a whisper, albeit Chen Ren managed to hear it. "He's not so BA. Someone who squanders away money every day, philanders with young girls like you, fights all the time in bar brawls and brags about challenging the heavens, yet can't succeed in the Soaring Sword sect entrance examinations. Too bad he got matched with the city lord's son, Li Xian, and had been on the bed for a week. He's still an esteemed guest and a cultivator. What if he got to know what you think of him? Then, that would be the end of me. Dang Su Lan Gulat? So be it, but anyone in the city who knows him thinks of him like that. It's only you who has rose-tinted lenses for your eyes. When I put it that way, it means you should go back to scrubbing the damn clothes. Sun isn't going to be up for much longer, you know? You want to get scolded by the young miss again when she comes back from the market? Oh no!" The young maid glanced up at the rising sun, gave one last look at the guest room before frantically running away and leaving Tang Xiaolan alone. Tang Xiaolan sighed, releasing her pent-up anger on her broom sweeps, each movement kicking up clouds of dust accumulated and fallen leaves from the nearby trimmed trees. She couldn't care less about Chen Ren, and for all she knew, it was only her master's goodwill and business connections with the Chen clan that let him stay here. She continued about her task of cleaning up the courtyard, finally reaching the last task of the day, cleaning the guest rooms. That also involved changing the bandages of Chen Ren, a task she vehemently hated. Still, she had to do it, and as she moved towards the guest rooms, she heard him talking to himself in a strange tone. What's going on? Have I really crossed over to another world? Fuck. I want to return back to my apartment. Appartement? She had no idea what that meant, and as she peeped in through the gap, she saw him pulling out his hair in exasperation. She wondered if he had gone crazy due to his defeat to Li Xian and had gained a heart demon. That thought scared her, and she took a step back, aiming to run away and inform her master. But before she could turn, Chen Ren noticed her. Hey, please come in. I want to talk to you, he said. She wished to refuse, but had no reason to. Slowly, she slid the door open and stepped inside, taking a look at the room which seemed to have gone through a storm. The round wooden table tucked neatly into the corner of the room was chock full of medication and ointments left behind by the healer, while bloodied bandages were strewn all over the floor. Books were scattered alongside crumbled parchments. Clothes and bed sheets lined the floor, and it seemed like Chen Ren had practically searched through the room for something. As she sized him up, she saw him staring right at her with his amber eyes. His long black hair, same as hers, was untied and reached the floor, and his skin was pale and unblemished. With a sharp jawline, he looked handsome, holding a medallion in his hand that she recognized as an heirloom of sorts. He should have been on the bed, barely being able to move as the healer had told them. Yet, there was a sharpness in his voice. Who am I? And your name? It's Tang Xilan, right? She looked at him in surprise. He had never spoken her name out loud before, and it was strange that he even bothered to remember it. Yes, young master. And you are Chen Ren, the scion of the Chen clan of Red Peak City, and I'm a third-star body forging realm cultivator, and this is the Tang clan courtyard in Cloud Mist City. Recently, I lost a fight against someone named Li Xian, trying to enter the Soaring Sword sect, and have been bedridden since then with half of my body scorched in the battle. She nodded her head slowly, confused as to what was going on. Yes, that's correct. The man's boisterous voice immediately dominated the serene courtyard the moment he stepped over the wooden threshold into the room. Chen Ren, you're alive. Thank the heavens. I watched that battle between you and Li Xian. It was certainly the most unfair fight to pit you against the city lord's son, but you did well. Not many can even survive against Blazing Hawk Fist. How have your injuries been? Chen Ren starred in a trance-like state for a few brief moments as Tang Xilan moved to leave and closed the door, giving them privacy. Who is this now? I faintly recalled someone like this. Feng Ming. From what he remembered, he was one of his few friends and drinking buddies, a cultivator on the same realm as him. Why was he here? He had no idea, but he needed to act like Chen Ren. Finally, he snapped out of the trance, replying with a joyful face and an exaggerated voice. Haha, a mere Blazing Hawk Fist wouldn't deter me at all. This entrance test was nothing but a mere hiccup in my path to be a cultivator who would challenge the heavens. True, Feng Ming said, scooping closer to him until he stood right in front. You have always been very motivated about your cultivation. One needs to be motivated when they are on the path to being immortal. You know that very well, Brother Ming, he replied, growing tired of maintaining a smile. I am happy that you came to check on me, and as you see, I'm recovering well. Feng Ming crossed his arms, his original enthusiasm clearly diminished for some reason. He gave a look around the messy room before snarling. I can definitely see that, and since you're recovering so well, then perhaps you would be able to return all the debt you currently owe me, right? Wait, what? Chapter 2. Market Research. Chen Ren stared into the eyes of the man, a cold realization sinking in. Had his luck gone this bad this soon? He had just entered this world and was already thrown into an inferno of trouble. Trouble in the face of a not-so-friendly man. His gaze had turned cold. The pleasant smile that adorned his face when he entered the room was no longer there. A chill ran down his spine under the gaze. Feng Ming's previous demeanor was probably a ruse, simply to know his condition, and now he was revealing his true motive for coming here. It was a clever ploy and one that he hadn't expected. His mind had been too preoccupied with things to prepare for debtors. He sifted through some of the memories related to this man, Feng Ming. In those, he witnessed how they would often go drinking together, and it was also Feng Ming who had told him to take a debt from him when Chen Ren's money had run out. Originally, the debt was small, just for drinks and food, but over time, it has accumulated to a good amount. It was almost as if he was trying to get Chen Ren in debt. A little more probing in his mind, and he realized why it was so. Feng Ming's eyes narrowed. "You're not going to back out of this, are you?" The menacing undertone brought him back to reality. Chen Ren met his gaze, his expression unchanged. In his mind, he was still calculating how to act with him with all the memories he had. He didn't want to act out of character or make himself sound more suspicious than he already had. He cleared his throat after a while. "Of course not, Brother Ming," he replied, his tone laced with feigned nonchalance. "I wouldn't dream of it. I was never going to hold back the money from you." The man's eyes flickered with doubt. "And how exactly do you plan to repay me? You have no job, no prospects, and you've failed the sect entrance exams. Don't you think you're just fooling me? Or yourself? At this point, I would never dream of breaking my promise," Chen Ren said, his voice firm. "Even if I'm down on my luck, my honor is intact." He paused, his eyes glinting with defiance as he thought on the right words to say. "Besides, I still have my connections. I'm a member of the Chen clan of Red Peak City. I've already sent a message requesting financial assistance to repay my debt." The man's expression shifted, his eyebrows raised in disbelief. Although Chen Ren had been exiled, most people in Cloud Mist City had no idea about it. Even the merchant family he was staying in was tight-lipped on this matter, and others only knew that he had a great background. They had no idea about the specifics. The original Chen Ren hardly spoke about his family, so this was probably something unexpected for Feng Ming. "You haven't asked them for money in months," he said, his voice laced with doubt. "Why now?" Chen Ren shrugged, affecting a nonchalant air. "I've been trying to make it on my own," he explained. "As you know, a cultivator needs to be brave enough to explore and challenge the world without the help of his family. But circumstances have forced my hand. The Chen clan is an ancient and powerful family. I'm sure they will come through for me." As soon as the words left his lips, a new fear crawled through his skin. Will his bluff even work? From how the black eyes bore into him, and how the man's lips had formed to a tight, thin line, he couldn't say what was going through Feng Ming's mind. He was fully prepared for a punch to fly and could only rely on his ability to shout to call for help from Tang Xiulan. Hopefully, she would be able to come to his aid with guards. At the same time, he faked a confident smile to Feng Ming, who still looked at him with skepticism. Finally, the man spoke. "Even if you get the money, when will it arrive? I can't wait indefinitely. It won't take long. I don't know how long it might take. I don't even know where Red Peak City is. Just tell me how much I would have to wait." The question worsened his worries. Chen Ren knew he had to come up with a solution quickly. He couldn't afford a physical confrontation, as cultivators love to talk with their fist, especially young ones like Feng Ming. The debt was around 500 silver won, and even if it was a fraction of the total debt he owed to various people, he knew it wasn't a small amount. It was safe to say Chen Ren's body wouldn't handle another bloody punch. But he wasn't going to just die after finding himself in this world. That would be too short of a life. As he looked around for a solution, an idea formed in his mind. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the medallion that he had been looking at before Feng Ming had arrived. "If this works, it'll buy me time. I don't even know what use it is for." "If you're so worried about your money," he said, his voice steady, "you can keep this as collateral until I repay you. But I want a promise from you that you won't sell it. It's an heirloom, and it holds significant sentimental value. It's also ancient, so I don't want to lose it." The medallion had been a gift to Chen Ren from his late father, who had gotten it from his own father, meaning it was fairly old. The former body owner obviously didn't care for it. No emotions were attached to it, and it was nothing that would keep him awake at night, even if it went missing. However, he didn't want it to be sold, especially to this man. For all he knew, it was ancient enough to go for a few thousand silver won, but it could also be worthless. Ordinary-looking ancient treasures were one of the staples of xianxia, after all. Chen Ren didn't even have the idea of the metal the medallion was made up of. Feng Ming's eyes lit up with greed as he took the medallion, examining it with a keen eye. "Very well. I'll come for the money in a month," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. 2 months, Chen Ren quickly retorted. "The city my clan lives in is far away." The man paused, then nodded. "Fine. 2 months. Don't disappoint me." With that, he gave a final, menacing glance, turned and left, leaving Chen Ren to ponder his next move. Chen Ren slumped onto the bed, his body aching with exhaustion. Everything that happened since morning came to him in waves. The transmigration, his current identity, and most importantly, the big, bad news, the debt. The ordeal had drained him physically and mentally. Although he wanted to think of an immediate solution, he knew he couldn't. Not at this state. Therefore, he did something he should have done right when he woke up in this body and closed his eyes, allowing sleep to claim him. There was a lot to do, and a part of him wondered if this was all a dream and he would wake up in his original body on Earth, going back to sending resumes to every company on LinkedIn. But for now, he just wanted to rest. It wasn't a dream. It had been 2 days since he woke up in this world, and no one else came to see him, partly because he instructed Tang Xilan to spread the rumors that he had gone back to being unconscious after waking up once. His memories had assimilated by now, and even his injuries seemed to have been healing at a considerable pace. He had no idea if it was because of his cultivation, the transmigration, or because of the potency of the medicines of this world. Still, the speed of healing was miraculous, and it wouldn't be possible on Earth. Even Tang Xilan was shocked when she came to check on him. It made him more curious to learn about this world and the secrets it held. At the same time, he realized that he was highly inadequate to do so. Chen Ren hadn't been much of a cultivating genius, nor was he hard-working enough to fill the gaps between him and others. The way to identify a cultivator's talent was by the number of spirit roots their dantian held, and he had merely 21 of them, meaning his talent was on the far lower end of the spectrum. He did have lightning aspect roots, which was considered rare, but with his abysmal number of spirit roots, it was of no use. If he had even a semblance of talent or hard-working nature, his clan wouldn't have kicked him out. But maybe he might be able to do something about it. On his 3rd day in this world, Chen Ren was finally trying out something that he should have done on the first day itself. He was going to see if he had a system inside of him. It felt a little silly, but transmigration itself was the strangest thing that could happen to someone. If 2 days ago someone had poked him and said he would transmigrate to a world where his body wouldn't be his own and his memory would be of learning magical kung fu in a land full of magical beasts, he'd slap that man and walk away without looking back. But now transmigration had happened. There was a chance that he'd get a system to guide him through the ups and downs of this world. He had to try. Similar to the countless books he'd read, he focused on his mind, on the memories of Chen Ren. The solution he had in mind was simple. If he could control the memories, he should be able to control the status screen. "Open status screen." Chen's voice came loud enough in the empty room, and he hoped that the maid wasn't standing outside. He opened his eyes, expecting a see-through screen with information. "Huh? Nothing. Maybe if I use different words." "System start?" Chen Ren commanded again. He squinted his eyes in focus and tried once more. "Essence display. Ascendant tracker. Chi monitor. Celestial dash. No holographic menus, no character stats, and no inventory. Just the cold, hard reality of his new world." He couldn't count the amount of alternative words he used, but in the end he gave up on that. If there was any status prompt to pop up, it would have already. He didn't necessarily expect a system, but he couldn't shake off the feeling that it would help him find his lefts and rights in this world. Without it, he needed to find new ways to gain strength, but before that, he needed money. Over 5,000 silver when of debt loomed over him, and one look at his memories was enough for him to realize that most people he had taken money from weren't simple folks. They would surely come for him, and he wasn't strong enough to deal with them. Running away wasn't an option either, and he didn't want to contend with the wildlands until he had a semblance of ability and money to hire guards. Chen Ren preferred plans that left room for adaptation, and there were only so many things that could make money in this world. It was fairly easy for a cultivator to make money, but most of that required him to move to dangerous places and fight monstrous beasts. So, he decided on a different way, one which employed his memories from Earth, the knowledge he had gained. He didn't remember everything, but he had a good memory and it would come in handy here. He decided to use his experience of working odd part-time jobs, learning things in his university, and online knowledge to start a business. He didn't have the required capital to do much, and he didn't want to borrow more, but he had connections and a bundle of knowledge. As he recovered, he saw enough differences between the technological level of the world and the one he had come from. His memories revealed a lot, and even if he had no knowledge of qi and cultivation, there were a lot of ideas in his mind. He could employ those to draft up a business plan. So for the next 2 days, he scribbled away plans of ventures he could dabble in and also wrote down things that could potentially harm him. From debtors to rogue cultivators, Chen Ren wanted to take no risk as he went on with his ideas. I might be in a rotten situation, practically an orphan and exiled, failed to get in a sect and heavy on debts. But I'm not one to give in to circumstances. If this was a sinking boat with holes, I had no option but to learn how to swim. It had been a week since he had woken up in this unfamiliar body, and finally, the day to venture outside had arrived. Thanks to Tang Xiaolan and the kindness of the merchant family, he was able to recover in peace. She had been his only visitor as per his request to not allow anyone inside the room, and even if someone came, she would turn them down by saying he hadn't woken up. Unsurprisingly, it worked. No one wanted to visit an unconscious Chen Ren, and it seemed like most of his debtors had decided to leave him be. He could feel that Tang Xiaolan didn't like him, but she had worked with a quiet efficiency when she brought him medicines to recover and cleaned his room. He was thankful and tried to be polite with her, but her wariness hadn't dropped. The previous occupant of this body hadn't been a pleasant person, and it took time to change perception. Still, he was thankful for her and planned to return the favor once he had some money to spare. First step would be to check out my surroundings and see if my plan is going to work, he thought as he got up, feeling a surge of energy and excitement on finally being able to venture outside. He slipped on a loose-fitting robe, making sure to cover most of his face. He wasn't sure if his creditors had taken any drastic measures, for instance, planting people outside to wait for him, and he wasn't eager to find out. It was best to keep a low profile for now. He closed the door of the room and walked outside. He took a look around and saw that he was in a wide hallway, and his memories helped him navigate through it. But as he turned around a corner, he was met with a watchful pair of eyes. "Where are you going, young master?" Tang Xiaolan asked, her voice laced with curiosity. She was holding a tray of food and seemed to be heading towards his room. Chen Ren offered a reassuring smile. "I'm going to the market. I need to check out a few things." She hesitated, her eyes scanning his face. "I know you have healed, young master, but the master wanted to see you after lunch," she said, her voice low. He paused in his steps. The merchant family he had been living with was called Tang Clan, and its head's name was Tang Jihao, a man who had started from nowhere and now dabbled in quite a few businesses around the city. They hadn't met for more than twice since coming to this city, as Tang Jihao was always busy, and now that he had healed, Chen Ren could guess what he would have wanted to talk about. "I'll visit him later," he said, delaying the inevitable for the moment. "Right now, I have some errands to run." He stopped and looked at her. She stiffened. "I'm not going there to buy something. I plan to start up a business, and for any business, one needs to scout out the market. You can't enter a lake without knowing what type of fish swims inside of it." "Business?" Tang Xiaolan looked at him aghast, but he started moving again. She followed after him, taking the lead to take him to the market, but she kept tilting her head and looked confused. Chen Ren knew she wasn't going to believe him. His predecessor wasn't the type to like merchants and businesses, and even look down upon them. He was using Tang Clan as a residency, but he always had an air of superiority about him. He was an idiot, and now it was his job to change that. Soon, they reached the market and found it bustling with activity. The air was thick with the scents of exotic spices and the clamor of merchants hawking their wares. He looked around slowly, taking in the details in broad daylight. Silken fabrics in every imaginable hue fluttered in the breeze, their rich textures on display. On one side, artisans displayed intricate jewelry, each piece shining, catching the attention of multiple women who stood by the stall. He guessed that most of them were fake, if not all, but they were good enough to use in daily lives. They rounded another corner. The scent of freshly baked bread mingled with the aroma of sizzling meats from food stalls made his mouth water and stomach grumble. They didn't linger, but he took in all the items that were selling here. Most of them were meat dishes, especially pork, and he also saw a lot of fish getting grilled. There were also steamed buns getting sold, and quite a few people clamored for them. There seems to be good demand for the food stalls. I wonder where they get the ingredients from, he muttered, moving to stand across a crowd that was gathered around a steam bun stall. His words were directed at Tang Xiaolan, and she immediately picked up on it. They have dealings with farmers, fishermen, and the pigsty. From what I know, a lot of stall owners directly buy from them in bulk, and they also give money to hunters to get specific meat. What about beast meat? Chen Ren asked, squinting to check out the different types of meat dishes on display. Do any of them sell that? Tang Xiaolan shook her head. No, even a Tier 1 beast is hard to deal with, and even if a group of hunters sometimes manage to hunt one, it's rare. Only a cultivator could procure beast meat easily, and no sane cultivator would start a food stall or have dealings with one. He felt like that part was aimed at him, but she continued without skipping a beat. As you know, there are restaurants in Cloud Mist City that serve beast meat, but they have direct dealings with Soaring Sword Sect for the meat. Chen Ren recalled that his predecessor dined in one of them and didn't have money to pay, so he had borrowed money from Fengming. The majority of debt he owed to him was due to that. He nodded at Tang Xiaolan as his mind raced with the information. A part of him felt like a beast meat stall would work wonders, but if he actually started selling it, most of the commoners wouldn't be able to afford it. Beast meat was expensive, and he had no plans of taking a loss. Moreover, selling it directly to commoners might be going against the sect, who probably sold it as an additional source of income. Let's keep moving, he said. Do you know any shops that sell cultivation supplies here? There will be some ahead. We are almost at the boundary of the upper district. They walked with the wave of the crowd. His eyes planted on the bunch of children who darted between adults, a carefree expression on their faces. For a moment, he felt like it would have been better if he had transmigrated as a child. At least he would have more time to find his way around this world then. As he moved further away, he suddenly felt a gaze on his back, and his heart fell. A prickling sensation crawled up his skin, and he wondered if he had been identified by the debtors. But he kept walking for a while before stopping around in front of a stall and sneakily looking around. But he found nothing. Was it just my mind playing tricks on me? What happened, young master? Tang Xiaolan asked, following his gaze. Nothing. Just stay still for a while. She kept quiet, and he pretended to check the trinkets that the stall was selling. 10 minutes passed like that before he finally gestured for her to move. What was that? Tang Xiaolan finally asked. Is there someone following us? I just felt like someone is. It's nothing now. Sorry for scaring you. She stiffened at that, and he wondered if she had noticed someone, but her gaze was locked onto him. Young master, have I offended you? He shook his head, wondering what it was about. No, you haven't. Then, why are you so polite to me? I have never heard you say sorry to anyone before. Chen Ren didn't reply for a few seconds. He had given up on acting more like his predecessor, mainly because it was too much to act as such, and if he wanted to change his image, he needed to change the way he addressed people. I'm just trying to change. My defeat at the hands of Li Xian gave me a new perspective. He had no idea if she was going to believe him, but if he kept up with his current personality, Tang Xiaolan had to accept it sooner or later. They eventually reached a corner where an herbalist stall was booming with activity. Next to it, there was a blacksmith creating different items. A few city guards seemed to be talking to him, and even if Chen Ren was interested in eavesdropping to find out their relationship with the business owners, he didn't want to attract their attention. There would be ample time to look into the internal structure of the city later. Finally, they found their destination, which was a small shop located in an area beyond the market space. It was called the Upper District, an affluent area in the center of the city, and he had been here before more than once. Still, Chen Ren had no idea the market was right next to it and had never entered the shop before. Its shelves were lined with an assortment of herbs, pills, and talismans, each item bearing a price tag that made Chen Ren's eyes widen. A low-grade healing pill, for instance, cost nearly 2 months' worth of a common laborer's wages in this world, which was around 70 silver won. The more he moved through the shelves, the higher the prices rose. Young master, you looking for something? The shop clerk walked from behind one of the shelves. He was a tall, lean man with baggy eyes. He seemed to be overworked from one glance, and Chen Ren had no idea why, since the shop didn't seem to have a lot of customers at the moment. Maybe he had simply come at a dull phase. Not really, no. Was just wondering about the prices, that's all, Chen replied faint-heartedly. The clerk smiled at that. They're expensive, I know. The path of cultivation is not for the faint of heart or the empty pocket. These herbs, pills, and talismans you see are not mere commodities. They're the essence of years of research, rare ingredients, and countless hours of refining, and I'm pretty sure they would help you out on your journey. Our items are much better than anyone else in the city, directly procured from Soaring Sword Sect, and if you wish, I would like to show you one of our special pills that would help out anyone in the body-forging realm to make a breakthrough. Chen Ren smiled at the clerk's words. He had clearly identified him as a first-realm cultivator due to his age and tried to use it to sell him pills. How much will it cost? Just 100 silver won. If you want a few of better qualities, it will be 300 silver won. Do you want to take a look at it? His face fell hearing the prices. I would refrain from doing so, he said as a matter of fact. Like I said, I simply want to take a look around the shop for now. Thank you. The clerk nodded and moved out of his way to talk to someone else who walked through the entrance. Chen Ren took that time to wander farther inside the shop with Tang Xiaolan following behind him. His mind calculated prices and noted the names of the items in his mind, just in case for the future. As he had expected, he could buy none of the items right now. Even the lowest grade pills would cost him a lot, and he could simply not afford it right now. If he actually planned to cultivate, his talent was going to be a big obstacle for him, and for him to go past realms, even with his below-average talent, he would need a lot of resources. After more than 15 minutes of staring at them, he decided to take his leave. On his way out, he looked at the clerk and gave a small nod. May fortune favor you on your journey, young master. The clerk's optimistic voice rang after him. May fortune favor me. I hope so, too. He had no idea if the clerk was being nice to him because of his robes, or if he was just like this to all potential customers. Either way, he decided to remember his face and made his way back towards the streets that housed food stalls. The smell of fresh bread hit his nostrils once again, but this time, his mind reeled. He kept thinking over the prices of cultivation resources and his debt. The world of cultivation was a realm of opulence and exclusivity. He knew that well, but seeing it was different. It was a cold slap of reality that sobered him up. What kind of a mess have I gotten into? Chen Ren winced at that thought. That was followed by another thought, and another, until a train moved in circles inside his mind, and he found himself in front of a vendor selling skewers of grilled pork, the savory scent proving too tempting to resist. How much for a skewer? Chen Ren asked, looking at the juicy meat sizzling. 5 copper won. The man behind the stall replied with urgency, tending to the other customers who had already taken space. Give me 3. Chen reached into his pocket inside his robe, pulling out 2 copper coins of 5 and 10 denominations respectively. He passed one of them to Tang Xiaolan, who bowed her head in gratitude before giving the rest to the man. Soon, his taste buds were filled with the enriching proteins. After a few bites, he felt possibilities rising in his mind. In this world, mortal currency was in 1, and it mostly had copper and silver coins, with 100 copper making up 1 silver one. It was an easy enough system for him to learn, and his goal for today was simply to find out how the economy worked around here, for both cultivators and mortals. His trip had told him that even if he wanted, he couldn't look at the cultivation resources until he got through his debt. Money was the key. With enough of it, he could purchase the resources he needed to cultivate, he could repay his debts, and he could even carve out a comfortable life for himself. As he finished his first skewer, he looked up at the stall owner and the people around him. He slowed down his chewing and simply observed him, noticing that he was selling at least 10 skewers every half an hour. His mind calculated the cost of the supplies, the time, and the price of the license to start up a stall. The more he thought, the more it seemed like a stall was the perfect beginning business for him. Young master, are you okay? Tang Xiaolan brought him out of his thoughts, and he looked down at her. Yes, I'm just thinking about something. Can I ask what? She asked, her face curious. You can, he replied. I'm simply thinking that I should start up a stall, not for selling beast meat. That would be too luxurious, but to sell food items. I believe I could start one that would sweep through the city and would be very popular. Tang Xiaolan blinked, her face a shade of disbelief. Young Master Chen, I'm sorry, but most of the stalls around here are old and have a steady set of customers. New stall owners already have a hard time, and this work is far beneath your stature as a cultivator. No work is beneath anyone, Xiaolan. In the grand sects, cultivators act as maids to other powerful cultivators. Is that work beneath them? But they are still under cultivators, not mortals. It doesn't matter. Either way, I'm starting my own thing and not working under someone else. Chen Ren shook his head. As for how I would make a difference in the market, it's pretty simple. I'm just going to create a product that's unique to me and make it popular. An unique product? Tang Xiaolan tilted her head. What type of dish would that be? Chen Ren smiled. You will see. It will surely be one that you would enjoy. The more he talked, the more excited he got about what he had in mind. A dish that he had eaten a lot on Earth, and even if he wasn't able to make it exactly the same, he knew a recipe that would work here. A recipe that would take over the city. Chapter 3. Old Man Tian. His first trip to the market narrowed down the scope for what could be his first business, but there were still quite a few worries swimming freely in his mind. One of them was the constant reminder of debtors. The whole situation was sticky. Sticky enough that it would put him in deep trouble if he didn't start working on the things he had planned. If only Chen Ren hadn't been a hedonistic bastard. Now he was gone, but the due hangers remained. Feng Ming, the first taste of the cruelty of the situation, didn't give the kindest of warnings until the collateral was given, but at least it was just one person. If the others who Chen Ren owed had also come, he wouldn't have that many assets to calm them down. In the best-case scenario, they might not come find him at all. Though it didn't matter since he would have still needed at least 500 silver within the next 2 months to get back his medallion from Feng Ming. Upon his return from the market to his abode, he immediately sought the aid of Tang Xiaolan to pen letters to each of Chen Ren's debtors, humbly requesting leniency and an extension of time. It was a gamble, sending out these letters, as it might either buy him the precious time he needed or invite unwanted scrutiny. But at this point, he was no stranger to risk. He would not sit idly by while the wolves circled closer. It was better to know what was coming to him rather than wait for them to knock on his door. As he wrote the letters, he understood more and more who his predecessor had borrowed from. Local gangs to even the Li clan. He had taken money from whoever was willing to give it. It was a shock to learn that he hadn't borrowed anything from the Tang clan, but he guessed that his predecessor was already living in the guest room without rent for months and didn't want to do anything that might ruin the arrangement. With the letters sent, he knew the first stone had been cast. Chen Ren knew better than to invite disaster by waiting for it to arrive at his doorstep. His recent encounter with Feng Ming had left a bitter taste in his mouth, a reminder that his standing in this world was fragile. Though his pride chafed at the idea, he recognized the wisdom in humility. Better to extend a hand in peace than to let a blade come close to my throat. Moreover, Chen Ren's reputation in this world had been that of a man too proud for his own good, so a humble request for understanding might just catch his debtors off guard. It was a calculated move, one that could either buy him time or invite further disdain. But in his mind, the roll of the dice was worth it. Beyond this, Chen Ren established a disciplined routine over the next 3 days. Each morning, he would make his way to the marketplace, his eyes sharp as he perused the stalls. He made purchases sometimes, but he was not there to spend money. Instead, he observed, learning the intricacies of the marketplace, the competitions between stalls, unspoken rules, the ebb and flow of customers, and the subtle interactions between stall owners. His efforts were not in vain. The stall owners, most of them who were seasoned merchants, were more than willing to share their knowledge. Of course, he had to buy their goods to loosen their tongues, but the information he gathered was invaluable. They didn't see him as a threat, which suited him just fine. After all, the more they underestimated him, the better for him. As he gathered insights, he began to see the marketplace for what it truly was, a battlefield. But unlike other fights, this one required patience, cunning, and a keen understanding of the human heart. That was an economic market, and one couldn't just brute force their way to the top in it, unlike cultivation. Every time he made his rounds through the marketplace, he felt strange eyes on him. He understood why. Clad in the fine robes of a young master from a reputable household, his appearance alone made him an oddity among the rougher, more practical traders and common folk. His handsome features, sharp yet softened by the polish of privilege, only made him stand out more. It was clear to anyone with half a mind that he didn't belong among the stall keepers and street merchants. Yet, here he was, day after day, seemingly more interested in their mundane dealings than a man of his stature should be. He didn't let their looks bother him, though. They could whisper and speculate all they wanted. He had more pressing concerns. Still, there was no denying that his behavior drew attention, especially from the Tang clan's family maid. Tang Xiaolan didn't accompany him every day, but whenever she had free time, she would quietly follow, her eyes constantly flickering to him, as if trying to decipher some hidden motive behind his actions. Today was such a day where she had been around. At first, he ignored her glances. But as they walked, they grew more frequent until he could no longer pretend not to notice. Finally, he turned to her, his tone measured but with a hint of impatience. "If you have something to say, then say it," he demanded, watching as she flinched at his directness. She hesitated, clearly torn between her duty and her curiosity. After a moment, she nodded, gathering her courage before asking the question that had been gnawing at her. "Young master, why are you doing this? Visiting the stalls every day, speaking to these merchants. It's not something someone of your standing would usually do." His eyes softened slightly as he considered her question. He knew that his behavior must seem strange to her, someone who had known his predecessor, an arrogant and untouchable young master. But again, it was not his reality anymore. He was not the previous Chen Ren, and he could never be like a cultivator too stuck up his ass. Chen Ren's response was simple. "I did tell you before. I want to start up a business, and I'm doing market research for it," he said with a straight face as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Xiaolan blinked in surprise, her expression shifting from confusion to shock, as if he had just uttered the most blasphemous statement she had ever heard. She stared at him, waiting for the punchline, but when she realized he wasn't joking, her shock turned to concern. "Young master," she began carefully, appearing as if she was trying to find the right words to convey her doubts without offending him. "Starting a business isn't easy. There are many rules and regulations to follow. You'll need to establish a supply chain, deal with suppliers, and manage all sorts of details. It's not something to be taken lightly. If you really want to start up a business, you should do so with cultivators, not among stall owners." "Do you think cultivators would let me deal with them? Even if I have a good product, there's no guarantee they won't just steal it. I'm not strong enough to work with them." Tang Xiaolan again looked alarmed. "I'm sorry, young master, but still, mortal businesses are a complicated matter." He saw those words coming from a mile away. From the start, ever since he let her know what his plans were, she had not been optimistic about him starting a business. Chen Ren nodded along. "I'm aware of that, Xiaolan. That's why I've decided to start with something simple, something that's easy to manage but has the potential to grow into something much larger. A business that could span the entire Kalian Empire if done correctly." Her skepticism was palpable, but by how she was fidgeting her fingers, it looked like her curiosity got the better of her. "What kind of business can that be, young master?" she asked, her tone cautious. Chen Ren turned to her, his eyes gleaming with determination. "You already know the answer to that, too. A stall." For a moment, Xiaolan's face was a portrait of disbelief. She stared at him as if he had just declared himself the emperor of the empire, her eyebrows about to touch her hairline and her jaw about to hit the floor. But then, as if remembering her place, all her facial features quickly returned to their natural state. She inhaled a generous amount of air and stood like she normally did. After all, she had no right to question him, even if his plans seemed contentious to her. She doesn't know how far the food industry can truly go. In the Kalian Empire, there's no concept of a restaurant chain or a franchise like how it was on Earth. Most of them here are bound to a city or town. They soon arrived at the familiar stall, one that had become a part of his daily routine. Today, there were only a few men who stood in front of it, unlike some busy days where an extra person would be too much in a crowded place. Chen Ren found it easy to walk closer to the stall and stand in the front. The stall owner, old man Tian, was cheerful doing his daily skewer selling to a tall man who mindlessly captured the entire space. He immediately spotted him and greeted him with a broad grin, clearly pleased to see a repeat customer. "Ah, young master, welcome back," old man Tian called out. "You have brought the young miss here again today." Chen Ren smiled at that. Without waiting for a response, old man Tian started preparing his grill. "What will it be today? The usual?" Chen Ren nodded, his expression calm. "Yes, 2 skewers, please." As the stall owner expertly prepared the skewers, Chen Ren turned to Xiaolan and handed one to her without a word. They ate in silence for a moment. After a few bites, Chen Ren looked up and asked, "Were you able to do that thing I asked for?" Old man Tian's eyes brightened with understanding. "Yes, young master," he replied with a smile. "It's all taken care of. All that's left is to submit the document at the government office, explaining the nature of your stall and such." Chen Ren gave a small nod of appreciation. "Thank you. What time would be best to do that?" The stall owner leaned in slightly. "Tomorrow morning, early. That's when the clerks are in a good mood and the lines aren't too long." "Understood," Chen Ren said, finishing his skewer with deliberate care. He handed the empty sticks back to the stall owner with a nod of thanks before turning to leave, Xiaolan following close behind. As they walked back home, Xiaolan stepped closer to Chen Ren. "Young master," she began hesitantly. "What was that conversation about? You seem unusually close to that stall owner." "Old man Tian is one of the oldest vendors on this street," he explained. "He's seen many come and go, and he's always been more than willing to chat. Over time, I've made it a point to talk with him whenever I visit his stall, and I get a good rapport with him. Yesterday, I talked to him about getting a permit for the stall, and he helped with it. As you know, doing anything in a government office isn't something as straightforward as it seems." Xiaolan frowned slightly, trying to piece together what he meant. "Not straightforward. Getting a permit isn't just about submitting a document. Sometimes you're expected to grease a few palms to get things done quickly, but I don't have the funds for that. So I've had to rely on good relationships and advice from those who've been through the process before." "Can't you just force your way through it?" she asked, surprising him a bit. "I can, but I have realized violence isn't the best way to solve things. If I force my way in, there'd be tens of ways more trouble could come my way. If I smack a simple clerk, he would bring out his nephew who's in a sect. If I smack him, the nephew would bring out his master," he said, ignoring the petrified look on Tang Xiaolan's face. "I asked the stall owner to put in a word with a clerk he might know. Not every clerk is the same. Some are more by the book, while others expect a little something extra. He pointed me toward one who won't take bribes and will get the job done quickly." "What does the stall owner get out of it in return, young master?" Chen Ren's lips curled into a slight smile. "He gets to do a small favor for a cultivator and a young master. I've subtly hinted at my intentions while enjoying his skewers, and he probably thinks I'm just playing around with the idea of running a stall, or that it's some sort of mental training as a cultivator. It doesn't matter what he believes. What matters is that he now has a story to tell, how he helped out a young master who's also a cultivator. That's worth more to him than any silver I could offer." Xiaolan nodded thoughtfully as they reached their compound. Chen Ren moved around to start heading towards his room from the courtyard. At that moment, Tang Xiaolan's voice called him out. "Young master, you might get the permit, but what are you planning to sell? From what I know, most things already have established stalls with regular customers." Chen Ren paused, turning to her with a confident smile. "I've thought about that for a while," he said, "and I've come up with something that will stand out, a dish that no one here has tried before, something they won't be able to get enough of." Intrigued, Xiaolan's eyes widened at his words. "What dish is that?" Chen Ren's smile widened as he replied, "How about I make some for you to try? All I need is a bag of rice and a mortar." Xiaolan blinked in surprise, but quickly understood the intention behind his words. "I'll get them right away, young master," she said, hurrying off to gather the requested items. A pair of sharp, shrewd eyes followed Chen Ren's every move, hidden in the shadows of a nearby alleyway. The figure observing him had been tracking his behavior for days, ever since he had begun his seemingly aimless wanderings through the marketplace. Tang Xiaolan's flabbergasted expressions and confused questions did nothing to reassure the observer. If anything, they only confirmed what she had already suspected. Chen Ren was dead, and someone else had taken over his body. The observer's thoughts swirled as she recalled the events that had led her to this conclusion. She had already known something was amiss when he had woken up after that fateful defeat. The Chen Ren she knew would have been crushed by the loss, wallowing in despair, perhaps seeking solace in the pleasures of the brothels or the bottom of a wine jar. But this man, he had done none of that. Instead, he walked around town with a sense of purpose, a glint of determination in his eyes that had never been there before. He seemed almost fascinated by the world around him, as if seeing it for the first time. Her eyes narrowed as she continued to follow him, moving through narrow spaces, windows, and rooftops. Every morning, she watched him converse with Xiaolan, noting every detail, every shift in his demeanor. This impostor was clever, she had to give him that. But he had made a fatal mistake. He underestimated the power of those who could see beyond the surface. She could see the souls of everyone, and this soul was different. It was stronger and more resilient, and it was slowly merging with the remnants of Chen Ren's original soul. Whoever this person was, he wasn't the defeated young master who had once inhabited this body. Was he a demonic cultivator? Or perhaps a shapeshifter, one skilled enough to take on another's identity so seamlessly? She couldn't be sure, but she was certain of one thing. This man was not Chen Ren. Her gaze hardened as she stepped back further into the shadows, her eyes glinting with a menacing glow. Whoever he was, she would find out soon enough. Their meeting was inevitable, and when it happened, she would uncover the truth behind this strange soul inhabiting Chen Ren's body. As she slipped away, blending into the darkness, a cold smile played on her lips. The impostor might think he was clever, but she was always one step ahead. And when the time came, he would have to answer for whatever game he was playing. That was her duty.
Chapter 4. Rice. What?
Tang Xiaolan walked quietly to the kitchen, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains that were visible from outside the chamber halls. But her thoughts were wandering away, wrapped around the figure of a man who only recently was known as one of the most arrogant and hedonistic men in Cloud Mist City. Chen Ren, the young master she temporarily served, had been quite the individual whom she had gotten the chance to observe a few too many times to her liking. He was bold, brash, and full of empty boasts, but now she found herself at a loss with this new persona. He had been flaunting his cultivation, tossing around his weight in the city, and flirting with anything that moved, but now he was different. It started after the defeat by Li Xian. It hadn't been something small. The young master had almost died in front of many people. That day had shaken him to his core, she could tell. But instead of the loud proclamations of revenge or desperate attempts to regain his lost face, he had retreated into himself. He kept to his chambers, scribbling away in a language she didn't recognize. She had taken a peek at it when she had entered his room to clean and found the language unfamiliar and foreign. Tang Xiaolan wasn't illiterate and had been taught the common script. But it wasn't that. Moreover, there was a politeness to him now that hadn't existed before, a quiet respect in the way he spoke and acted. Not just with her, but with everyone. He even talked about starting a business, of all things. The idea was so far removed from the man she once knew that it made her wonder if he was even the same person. Is he the same person or a shapeshifter? No, if that was the case, I would have already been dead. Xiaolan couldn't shake the feeling that he was playing some kind of game, that this was all a facade. Yet when she looked into his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen before, a light, a spark of purpose and clarity that had been missing before. They were not the eyes of a defeated man, nor of one who sought to reclaim his former glory through the same reckless means. No, these were the eyes of someone who had glimpsed something greater, something beyond the petty squabbles of sects and clans, beyond the simple pleasures of life. And that unsettled her more than anything. The man she once knew might have been a fool, but he was a predictable fool. This new version, with his quiet intensity and strange behavior, was a mystery she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. Though she was certain he'd give up sooner or later, her confidence wavered when she discovered the reason behind his visits to the stall owners. It was a strategy so unexpected that it caught her off guard. Her mind drifted back to a few months prior when the family head had handed the young Miss Tang Yuchio a sum of money to start a business, to test her capabilities. But she had faltered at the very first hurdle, unable to secure a permit due to the officials' endless delays and other lazy reasons. And her father had barred her from using the family name to sway things in her favor. But Chen Ren was already ahead of where the young miss had stumbled, though she doubted his approach would lead to anything substantial. The idea that he could create a dish unique enough to captivate the entire empire seemed like just another empty boast, a large but empty boast. So when he had asked her to bring rice and a mortar, claiming he would craft this so-called legendary dish, she nodded and fetched the sack of rice that had been sitting in the kitchen, along with a mortar. As she handed him the items, a part of her wanted to see him fail, wanted to see that spark in his eyes and movements extinguished by the harsh reality that the world wasn't so easily conquered, things couldn't be easily achieved. When she gave the items, Chen Ren took them from her hands without a word, his expression unreadable. Then, to her surprise, he asked, "Can you help me out? This might take a while." There was no hint of the usual bravado in his tone, just a calm expectation that she would follow his lead. Tang Xilan nodded. Okay. They started by rinsing, then soaking the rice, a process that took 6 to 7 hours, an eternity in Xilan's mind. She had never known a dish to require such long and careful preparation, and the repetitive nature of it wore on her patience. When it was finally done, Chen Ren turned around and looked at her. He handed her the mortar. "Grind it," he said, leaving no room for debate. Xilan couldn't help but wonder if she was the one making the dish while he simply watched, but she complied nonetheless, her curiosity piqued despite the work. Either way, even if the entire thing ends up being an utter waste of time, she was just a maid. How could she defy the young master? Also, they had already spent quite a lot of time on this. Washing rice, then soaking them for almost 7 hours. Really? Xilan shook her head and focused on grinding the rice, resulting in a smooth paste. Throughout the process, she repeatedly asked what they were making, but Chen Ren remained tight-lipped, offering nothing more than a cryptic smile and a promise that she would soon see for herself. Finally, she finished her task and turned to him. "And now," she asked, "now you watch." He prepared a bamboo steamer and lined it with a cloth. Then, he poured a thin layer of the rice batter before closing the lid. After a minute, he opened the steamer and carefully removed the cooked layer of rice, placing it on a cutting board. He poured another layer of batter and repeated the process until all was used. Once the cooked rice had slightly cooled, he rolled the layers and cut them into thin strips, his hands moving with unexpected precision. The silence between them was punctuated only by the soft rustle of the wind outside. Xilan had never seen anything like it before. She watched, half in wonder, half in disbelief, as he took the strips and they moved back to the kitchen. There, he gathered the strips in a bowl, their texture smooth and translucent. The simplicity of the act belied the anticipation that had built up in the hours of preparation. "What is this called, young master?" she asked once again, not able to contact her curiosity. He smiled. "Noodles." Tang Xilan had never heard that before, but before she could ask more questions about it, another order came from Chen Ren. "I want you to bring me vegetables. Whatever you have, bok choy, spinach, mushrooms, green onions, scallions, carrots, broccoli." "Make haste," Chen Ren said while she tried to keep everything in her mind. The list wasn't hard to memorize, so she quickly walked off to fetch them, still unsure of how the noodles might taste. After she brought them back, they chopped the vegetables together, the slamming of the knife against the board being the only noise in the room. From time to time, she would glance at the young master and wonder how he was so skillful with a knife. She knew about his skills with the sword due to his boasting, but she had no idea it would also make him proficient in chopping. "What should we do next?" she asked once all the vegetables she managed to bring were cut into small pieces. Her question went unanswered as Chen Ren walked around the small space to reach the boiling water. "Hand me the vegetables," he commanded. She quickly took it to him and watched him throw them into the pot. A few minutes later, he scooped them out and added them to the rice noodles. The smell made Xiaolan's stomach grumble. He turned and handed the bowl to Xiaolan, who blinked at it in mild confusion. "These noodles, are they for me?" she asked, tilting her head at the unfamiliar dish. "Yes, and these are called rice noodles. There are more varieties of them, depending on the ingredients you use," he replied, his tone casual, as if the name of the dish wasn't strange at all. Seeing the bewilderment on her face, he simply added, "Go on, try it, and tell me what you think." Xiaolan hesitated, the nerves evident in the way she handled the chopsticks. She took a small bite, half expecting the dish to be as strange in taste as its name. To her surprise, the noodles were chewy, with a satisfying texture that paired well with the boiled vegetables. It could use a bit more seasoning, but the initial taste wasn't bad at all. It was pleasant. "It tastes good," she admitted, her voice carrying a hint of surprise. Chen Ren nodded and took the bowl from her, tasting the noodles himself. But unlike her, his expression shifted into a frown as soon as the noodles hit his tongue. "It doesn't even taste half as good as ramen," he muttered, and all Tang Xiaolan could think of was one thing. "What is this thing called ramen now?"
As Chen Ren set the bowl down, his mind churned with dissatisfaction. The rice noodles had come out well enough for a first attempt, but they were far from perfect. The texture was decent, and the flavor was acceptable, but acceptable wouldn't be enough if he wanted to turn this into a product that could dominate the market. The memory of Xiaolan's reaction played in his mind. Her initial surprise, the cautious bite, and the eventual approval. She enjoyed it, yes, but she hadn't been blown away. And that wasn't good enough for him. He couldn't afford to settle for mediocrity, not when the stakes were this high. If he was going to make a name for himself, if he was going to sell this dish across the empire, then it needed to be more than just acceptable. It needed to be exceptional. Every bite had to leave an impression, something that would linger on the tongue and make people crave more. Hence, from that day onward, he began experimenting in earnest. Each day brought new variations, new attempts to refine the texture, balance the flavors, and elevate the simple ingredients into something that'd leave his mark behind. He knew he had a long way to go, but he was determined. Because if he knew anything, it was that food could be something that would be etched into one's mind like a tattoo, whether it was good or bad. Foods were memories, and they could easily shock the taste buds, digging into the senses of one's very being. Another important thing when it came to them was their scent. He needed his noodles to be something that people craved daily, and for any dish to truly succeed, the details had to be perfect. For that, experimenting was the key. If he didn't dive deep into each aspect of the process, his efforts would be wasted, and customers wouldn't return. He must not give up, especially when his life was at stake. Fortunately, the Tang clan had an abundant supply of rice because one of their businesses was selling rice, and with the guest room courtyard currently unoccupied, he had the space and freedom to test his recipes. So, each day, he set to work, creating rice noodles with a focus that bordered on obsession. He experimented with everything. The exact amount of rice, how long he soaked it, the boiling time, the vegetables, the salt. Every evening, he called Tang Xiaolan to taste the newest batch, using her feedback to make incremental changes. She was candid with her opinions, sometimes too much so, but it was exactly what he needed. Each critique helped him refine the recipe further. At the same time, Chen Ren kept a careful eye on the cost of ingredients. He knew that while rice was relatively cheap, it alone wouldn't be enough to draw in a large customer base. The addition of salt and vegetables, though necessary for flavor, also increased the overall cost, which was something he had to keep in mind if he wanted the business to be profitable. He realized that creating a sauce to accompany the noodles, especially a spicy one, could be a key factor in making his dish stand out. But before he could even think about adding that extra layer of flavor, he needed to perfect the texture of the noodles themselves. They had to be more than just edible. They had to be something that left a lasting impression, something that people would come back for. Fortunately, it seemed that Chen Ren's efforts were paying off. Xiaolan's once skeptical eyes now watched him with anticipation every day as he prepared the noodles. He could tell that she expected something different every time she brought the chopstick to her lips. But it wasn't just her. Word of his daily experiments had spread among the servants, and even a young maid, who was too enthusiastic to know about the dish and taste, began showing up regularly, eager to sample it and offer her thoughts. Her name was Li Hua, and she had been supportive throughout, not just with trying the dish, but also with words of motivation. It seemed as if this young maid rooted for Chen Ren due to the flirting of his predecessor. Whenever she was done with tasting a meal, she'd say things like, "Young master, I will come by tomorrow too. It was better than yesterday, and I feel less boiling time would do wonders. Firmer noodles like 2 days ago would be great, or it could be my personal preference. Either way, eating a dish from your own hands seems like a dream." Xiaolan squinted her eyes at Li Hua before turning to the noodles. "I prefer softer noodles. Maybe, young master, you should try adding oil to the boiling water to prevent sticking and to add a subtle flavor." Chen Ren nodded. He had thought of it considering there were so many ways that noodles could be made. "How's the broth?" he asked. "The salt ratio is perfect, I feel," the younger maid replied with excitement. Xiaolan, on the other hand, simply nodded along. "Thanks." Chen Ren collected the dishes and went back, knowing the other maids would come rushing in soon. It was quite exciting. At first, Chen Ren thought they were merely being helpful, giving him feedback to refine his recipe. But the stars in their eyes and the way they eagerly awaited each new serving told a different story. They genuinely liked the noodles. A small part of him was tempted to start charging them, but since he wasn't paying for the ingredients, he decided against it. Besides, he didn't want to risk discouraging them from coming back. Their enthusiasm was valuable in its own right. These taste testers were the key to refining his dish. As he continued to make noodles for them every day, he found an unexpected joy in the process. A type of joy that couldn't be put into words but warmed the heart from the inside when he thought about it. Creating something that others enjoyed was fulfilling in a way he hadn't anticipated. While his ultimate goal was to make money, the satisfaction he felt when he saw the pleasure on their faces made the effort worthwhile, at least for now. "I always thought being a full-time cook was nothing but stress, but was this how Gordon Ramsay and Marco Pierre felt? Maybe I should have tried working at my uncle's restaurant. I may have had a hidden talent for cooking." He started piling the bowls so that he could be ready to serve when the maids came rushing in. It was during these moments of focus that he noticed something strange. His chi would occasionally flare up in his core, a sudden surge of energy that caught him off guard. He felt it everywhere to the tip of his fingers. A sensation, a tingle, a rush of something. It happened a few times as he worked on the noodles, but since there were no other effects, he didn't dwell on it too much. Like all those times, he chalked it up to his lack of training since arriving in this world, dismissing it as a minor side effect of his current lifestyle. For now, his focus was entirely on perfecting his noodles. With each new batch of noodles, he refined his process, and more servants began lining up in the guest room courtyard. Their eager faces waited for their turn to taste his creation. It almost felt like he was already running a stall, and the idea of taking the next step, moving outside and starting a real business, began to take root in his mind. Tang Yuqiu, the young miss of the Tang family, returned from overseeing one of the family's businesses. There was no work, but just checking if everything was going right was also a part of running a business. As she entered the main courtyard that evening, she was struck by the unusual stillness. The place was eerily quiet, with not a single servant in sight. Normally, they would at least be picking up water from the well, and there would be the sound of footsteps or chatter, but today it was as if the place was abandoned. Frowning, she turned to her maid, who always accompanied her. "Where is everyone?" Tang Yuqiu asked, her voice laced with irritation. Her maid hesitated for a moment before replying, "There's been a rumor, miss, about young Master Chen Ren. They say he's been making a dish for the servants every evening in the guest kitchen. They could be there." Tang Yuqiu scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Chen Ren? That idiot? He can't do anything right. What could he possibly be making that's worth their time?" Despite her dismissive words, curiosity got the better of her, and she motioned for her maid to lead the way. As they made their way through the corridors towards the guest courtyard that was adjacent to the main one, the distant sound of chatter and laughter grew louder, guiding them toward the source of the commotion. Finally, they turned a corner and came upon a long line of servants stretching out from the guest room courtyard. Even some of the older servants had joined the queue, waiting patiently with eager expressions. At the front, Tang Yuqiu spotted Chen Ren and Tang Xiaolan working together, preparing something and handling the bowls with utmost care. The moment the servants noticed Tang Yuqiu's arrival, The lively atmosphere froze. All eyes turned toward her, the air thick with tension as everyone stepped back, unsure of what to expect. Tang Yuqiu marched forward, her gaze narrowing as she approached Chen Ren. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked loudly, unable to hold what she was witnessing. Without looking up, Chen Ren responded with slight irritation from being disturbed. Chapter 5. Who the hell are you? First day. Who are you? Chen Ren's hands paused over the steaming pot of noodles as a shadow fell over him. He looked up and felt immediate regret when his gaze met the figure before him. Not because her presence commanded some sort of attention, but because her face resonated in the depths of his memory. The young miss of the Tang clan. There was no mistaking her. Different memories came rushing into him as he looked at her for a second more. She was young, with sharp, thin eyes, pursed lips and a pointed nose, with an elegance that belied her age. Her long, black hair flowed, framing a face that could easily be mistaken for a painted portrait. Her eyes, dark as night, held a sharpness that pierced through him, or anyone who could be standing in his position. He finally noticed how her short figure was looking up at him with an unwavering look of questioning. "Who are you?" "Really?" Chen Ren mentally slapped himself, knowing he could have at least looked up before questioning with such a commanding voice. But what was done was done. Before Chen Ren could speak up and clean the little mess he made, she spoke. "So, now you need me to introduce myself?" A slight mocking smirk tugged at the corner of her lips as she continued. "I'm Tang Yuqiu, the young miss of the clan you've been staying with all this time. If you can put on this show with the servants, it seems your injuries have healed. I thought even if you woke up after losing the battle, you wouldn't dare show your face in the Tang clan." Chen Ren, unfazed by her words, bowed his head slightly in acknowledgement. He knew better than to take offense. The relationship between them was complex as he had seen and known from Chen Ren's memories. "I didn't know you'd be around," he replied calmly. "And yes, my injuries have healed. As for the servants, I'm just cooking something for them." Tang Yuqiu arched an eyebrow, skepticism clear in her eyes. "Cooking? Do you really think I believe that? You've never been one to speak kindly to the servants, let alone cook for them." Chen Ren allowed a small smile to play on his lips as he gestured to the steaming bowls and the line of servants waiting eagerly. "As you can see, I've changed a bit." Before Tang Yuqiu could respond, Tang Xilan stepped forward, her tone respectful yet firm. "Young miss, young master is indeed cooking and distributing noodles to the servants. I'm helping him with that. It's also not interfering with their work. They come here after finishing their duties." Tang Yuqiu stared at Tang Xilan, her expression blank with shock. Her eyes went from his to the sight of the servants eagerly waiting for their turn, empty bowls in their hands. The idea of a servant, especially one like Xilan, defending Chen Ren was unthinkable, yet here it was, unfolding right before her eyes. Chen Ren himself was taken aback. Snapping out of his surprise, Chen Ren turned to Tang Yuqiu, his tone casual yet inviting. "If you'd like, young miss, you can try the noodles for yourself." Tang Yuqiu looked down at the steaming bowl of noodles in the servant's hand, her brows furrowed in confusion. "What even is that? Noodles? It's made from rice." "You'll like it," Chen Ren replied with a hint of confidence as he quickly prepared a bowl for her. Scooping up the already prepared noodles, he added a good amount of vegetables and broth. After all, he couldn't be stingy with someone who had technically provided him the ingredients. Tang Yuqiu's eyes widened as he handed her the bowl. She glanced between it and Chen Ren, unable to hide her shock at the sheer audacity of the situation. The longer she hesitated, the more awkward the moment became. Without missing a beat, Chen Ren prepared another bowl, this time for her maid, who took it with a clumsy bow. "Don't worry," he said with a chuckle. "It's not poisoned." Tang Yuqiu's cheeks flushed with a mix of embarrassment and irritation. She looked at the bowl again. Finally, she relented and took a cautious bite. Chen Ren watched her closely, a satisfied smile tugging at his lips. The pride of a cook settled deep in his heart. The last few days had been spent in a relentless pursuit of perfection. Rice noodles were a simple dish, yet within that simplicity lay countless possibilities. He had worked tirelessly, refining the texture and firmness of the noodles, adjusting the broth, and adding just the right amount of vegetables to enhance the taste. Seeing Tang Yuchio's expression soften as she ate, he knew he had succeeded in conquering the tastes of probably his richest customer until date. He recalled her father was quite the foodie, and because of that, she had eaten quite a lot of different types of dishes. If his noodles could impress her, then he definitely had the required skills to make it big. When she finally finished, Tang Yuchio looked at him, her gaze softened by a touch of wonder. It was good. Chen Ren's smile widened. Would you like seconds? She hesitated, her pride flaring up again. But from how she looked at the noodles, it was clear that the allure of them was undeniable for her. After a moment's pause, she nodded, albeit reluctantly. As he handed her another bowl, he couldn't help but tease. Mind if I finish distributing the rest to the servants? There's a lot of noodles, and you can't eat it all, right? Tang Yuchio glared at him, a mix of irritation and amusement in her eyes. Obviously not. You can continue. We can't waste food. With a light chuckle, Chen Ren resumed serving the noodles, the servants smiling appreciatively as they received their portions. As he worked, he could feel Tang Yuchio's gaze on him, her curiosity growing with each passing moment. What are you doing with these noodles anyway? She finally asked, her tone laced with suspicion. Are the bars closed, or have they finally decided to kick you out due to pending tabs? Why are you here cooking these dishes? No, Chen Ren replied, his tone steady as he finished handing out a bowl of noodles. I'm not interested in bars anymore. Tang Yuchio blinked, clearly taken aback by his response. You're not? Chen Ren shook his head. No, I'm doing this to test out a business idea. Are you serious? Chen Ren sighed, more to himself than to her. Why does everyone think I'm not serious? Yes, I'm serious. Very serious. That's why I developed these noodles, and I'm going to start selling them tomorrow. Tang Yuchio's expression remained doubtful. I don't believe it. Chen Ren's lips curled into a confident smile. Then come see it for yourself. Do you really think I'm just giving noodles out here for fun? She hesitated, clearly torn between disbelief and curiosity. Finally, she nodded. Sure, I will, she said, setting her bowl down and preparing to leave. But before she could step away, Chen Ren gently reached out and grasped her hand. Tang Yuchio's eyes flared with anger, her posture stiffening as she shot a glare at him. Touching her like that, especially in front of the servants, was a breach of decorum, bordering on something far more intimate. What do you think you're doing? She demanded. Chen Ren quickly released her hand, his expression earnest. Let me buy 10 pounds of rice from you. What? I really want to sell these noodles, Chen Ren explained. Right now, I'm using ingredients from the guest room kitchen, but if I'm going to sell them, I can't keep doing that. There's honor and ethics in business, and I want to do this the right way, unless you have fallen for my noodles and want to donate the ingredients. Tang Yuchio studied him for a long moment, ignoring his last few words before replying, I won't sell it cheap. Chen Ren nodded, undeterred. We can negotiate. Right now, I don't need a lot, but if this works, we can talk about a bigger purchase. Tang Yuchio gave a thoughtful nod. Let's talk tomorrow, she said before turning to leave, her posture more composed than before. Early the next morning, Chen Ren found himself standing with Tang Yuchio in a quiet corner of the Tang clan's storage area, the soft light of dawn casting long shadows over the bags of rice stacked neatly along the walls. A few guards stood nearby alongside Tang Yuchio's maid, their faces blank as they did nothing more than to add to the background. Ignoring them, he focused on the rice bags. He needed just 10 pounds for now, enough to test his idea and see how the evening crowd would react to them. Tang Yuchio watched him closely as he inspected the rice on his palms, her expression unreadable. As 1 pound was priced around 4 to 10 copper one depending on the quality, Chen Ren thought for a moment. I'll give you 5 copper one per pound, he said, his tone straightforward. Tang Yuchio arched an eyebrow, her voice firm. 10 copper. This rice is worth way more than what you're offering. Chen Ren resisted the urge to sigh. He knew this wouldn't be easy. It's good quality, but 10 copper is too much. 6 copper per pound, and I'll take 10 pounds. She crossed her arms, clearly not inclined to back down. 9 copper, and that's my final offer. Chen Ren shook his head. a small smile playing on his lips. 7 copper is fair for both of us. I'm not asking for charity, just a reasonable price. 7 copper, and I'll consider this a done deal. Either way, this is probably not much for you to gather, and I'm giving you a good opportunity to make a small profit. Tang Yuqiu narrowed her eyes, sensing the determination in his voice. After a long moment of silence, she relented with a slight nod. Fine, 7 copper per pound, but don't expect this kind of generosity next time. Chen Ren chuckled, pleased with the outcome. I wouldn't dream of it. With the negotiations settled, Chen Ren quickly weighed out 10 pounds of rice and handed over the agreed amount of copper coins. As he turned to leave, he noticed the young miss watching him with an expression of mild surprise. You're good at this, Tang Yuqiu remarked, almost as if she couldn't quite believe it. I didn't know your clan birth merchants too. Chen Ren offered her a modest smile. They don't. At least not anyone I can remember. But they do have cultivators with a silver tongue who strive to get more than what's in their fate. You can think of me as one of them. Either way, I'll see you around, young miss. She nodded, still looking a bit stunned as he walked away, using a guard to carry the rice back to his temporary kitchen in the guest courtyard. Honestly, he didn't need any help, but he was still a guest and a cultivator, and it wouldn't look good for him to carry all that load. Though, he guessed that he was either way going to break a few cultivation conventions by selling noodles on a stall. The rest of the morning was peaceful. As it was going to be his start of the stall, he had to inform the servants he won't be giving out more noodles to them. At the same time, he needed to make sure he had everything before he ventured to the streets. He already got the permit, so he just needed to prepare the ingredients in the stall. Chen Ren soaked the rice carefully, taking his time with every batch he took to wash. He also got a few vegetables. He wasn't going to add them in the regular noodles, but he could always add more variety for more money. As the grains soaked, he turned his attention to setting up his stall. Carpentry wasn't his strong suit, so he scoured the Tang clan manor until he found an old and used stall in the old storage room. It wasn't much to look at, cheap, weathered wood with a few splinters sticking out, but it would do for now. As long as he had space to create noodles, he wouldn't bother to complain. He hauled it back to the guest courtyard and set it up, giving it a quick once-over to ensure it was stable. Next, he paid 4 coppers for a set of cheap bowls. They were plain and unadorned, but they would serve their purpose. Finally, he set to work on a signboard. His drawing skills were decent, and he carefully sketched out a simple image of a steaming bowl of noodles. Below it, he wrote in neat characters, rice noodles, 5 copper 1. He knew that most of the population was illiterate, so the drawing would have to do most of the work. The image of the noodles, simple as it was, would hopefully catch the eye of anyone passing by. As the day went on, he felt more and more that he was ready. The stall was there, the rice noodles were prepared, and the signboard was prominently displayed. It was going to be the first evening of his first business venture in this new world. Chen Ren stood in the marketplace, setting up his modest stall in one of the few empty spots that were left. Tang Xilan was by his side, helping him arrange the bowls and make sure everything was in place. It was a simple setup, nothing fancy, but it was all he needed to get started. As they finished arranging everything, old man Tian from the skewer stall across the way wandered over, eyeing Chen Ren's stall. I didn't expect to see the young master personally selling stuff, he said, his tone both amused and respectful. Chen Ren smiled and shrugged. I wanted to cook, and there's nothing better than seeing the satisfaction on people's faces when they enjoy good food. The old man nodded, looking around at the crude setup before asking, So, what are you selling? Noodles, Chen Ren replied simply, gesturing to the signboard with the drawing of the rice noodles. The old man squinted at the sign, clearly puzzled. Noodles, eh? Never heard of them. How much, young master? 5 copper per bowl, 7 for vegetable rice noodles, Chen Ren said, hopeful that the man's curiosity might lead to a sale. But the old man shook his head, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. 5 copper, huh? Too much for a dish I never heard of. I think I'll stick to my skewers. With that, he moved back to his own stall, leaving Chen Ren and Tang Xilan to wait. Chen Ren didn't think of it much either. Was the noodles overpriced? Not in any way. If anything, he had observed, calculated, and measured if it was worth the price they were selling. Expectedly, anyone with a brain would know that it is. After Old Man Tian returned to his stall, Chen Ren and Xilan waited. They waited and waited. As the minutes turned into hours, not a single customer approached their stall. The market was lively, with the other stalls busy with activity, but Chen Ren's corner remained stubbornly quiet. He could feel the stress of each passing moment, the growing tension gnawing at the back of his mind. He couldn't blame the crowd. His stall, with its plain appearance and lack of seating, didn't exactly scream for attention. Plus, he was offering something completely new. A slow start was to be expected. But as the second hour dragged on without a single customer, Chen Ren's patience began to wear thin. He glanced over at the Old Man Tian's skewer stall, which was surrounded by people. The old man noticed him watching and with a mischievous glint in his eye, gave a smile that only served to stoke the embers of Chen Ren's frustration. "I'll show him how to get a stall running," Chen Ren muttered under his breath, his jaw tightening in determination. Tang Xiaolan, who had been quietly observing the situation, looked up at him with curiosity. "What are you going to do, young master?" He didn't answer right away as his mind worked. In this world, most of the online marketing stuff he knew was useless, and he had to rely more on word of mouth to attract attention. But if no one tried his noodles, there was never going to be any of that. The more he thought, the more he felt like he was close to getting an idea until his expression brightened with sudden inspiration. "I have a great idea," he said, a sly grin spreading across his face. Once it works, Old Man Tian would change his sly grin to one of envy. Chapter 6. Marketing Idea. Chen Ren stood at his humble stall, the scent of freshly made rice noodles wafting through the air. Ever since he'd been making those noodles, he felt like he smelled of rice noodles and broth. He looked around, taking in the sights and sounds. Lines and lines of stalls lined in the street, each vendor shouting out their wares with practiced fervor. Brightly colored banners fluttered in the wind, and the mixture of haggling voices melded with the clatter of carts and the laughter of children. He had overestimated himself. Just because he had a product from Earth, he had thought it would be an instant success in this world. After all, it had worked back in the Tang clan's courtyard. Servants lining up daily, eagerly awaiting his latest batch of noodles. But he realized now that there had been more to their enthusiasm than just the taste. They were curious about the novelty he brought with him, intrigued by his sudden transformation from a disinterested youth to a diligent cook. And of course, the noodles were free. Out here, on the crowded streets of the city, it was a different story. His stall was just another face in the crowd, blending in with the myriad of other food vendors and merchants selling everything from exotic spices to handmade trinkets. No one stopped. No one even glanced his way. He was invisible among the throng, another forgettable peddler with no charm or allure to his setup. Chen Ren frowned, tapping his finger against the wooden counter. He needed to rethink his approach. Marketing, that was the key. Back on Earth, businesses rose and fell on the strength of word of mouth. He had learned that firsthand during his brief stint working in a noodle shop back in high school. He needed to create a buzz, and he had just the trick to get people talking. All he needed was a little bit of attention, something to draw in the first few customers, and let word of mouth do the rest. His eyes roamed over the crowd, searching for inspiration. There were merchants haggling over prices, nobles in fine silks moving through the market with their retinues, farmers with weather-beaten faces hauling produce, and beggars crouched by the roadside, holding out their hands for alms. He took it all in, letting the chaos wash over him. Then, his gaze fell on a group of children huddled near the entrance of a narrow alley on the other side of the street. They were scruffy and tiny, with eyes wide with hunger and curiosity as they watched the busy stalls and the food being sold. Every now and then, they whispered among themselves, heads ducked low, as if trying not to draw attention to themselves. It was clear to anyone who would look at them to know what they were planning to do. A smile tugged at Chen Ren's lips. They were the ones he was looking for. Chapter 6. Marketing Idea. Chen Ren stood at his humble stall, the scent of freshly made rice noodles wafting through the air. Ever since he'd been making those noodles, he felt like he smelled of rice noodles and broth. He looked around, taking in the sights and sounds. Lines and lines of stalls lined in the street, each vendor shouting out their wares with practiced fervor. Brightly colored banners fluttered in the wind, and the mixture of haggling voices melded with the clatter of carts and the laughter of children. He had overestimated himself. Just because he had a product from Earth, he had thought it would be an instant success in this world. After all, it had worked back in the Tang clan's courtyard. Servants lining up daily, eagerly awaiting his latest batch of noodles. But he realized now that there had been more to their enthusiasm than just the taste. They were curious about the novelty he brought with him, intrigued by his sudden transformation from a disinterested youth to a diligent cook. And of course, the noodles were free. Out here, on the crowded streets of the city, it was a different story. His stall was just another face in the crowd, blending in with the myriad of other food vendors and merchants selling everything from exotic spices to handmade trinkets. No one stopped. No one even glanced his way. He was invisible among the throng. Another forgettable peddler with no charm or allure to his setup. Chen Ren frowned, tapping his finger against the wooden counter. He needed to rethink his approach. Marketing, that was the key. Back on Earth, businesses rose and fell on the strength of word of mouth. He had learned that firsthand during his brief stint working in a noodle shop back in high school. He needed to create a buzz, and he had just the trick to get people talking. All he needed was a little bit of attention, something to draw in the first few customers, and let word of mouth do the rest. His eyes roamed over the crowd, searching for inspiration. There were merchants haggling over prices, nobles in fine silks moving through the market with their retinues, farmers with weather-beaten faces hauling produce, and beggars crouched by the roadside, holding out their hands for alms. He took it all in, letting the chaos wash over him. Then, his gaze fell on a group of children huddled near the entrance of a narrow alley on the other side of the street. They were scruffy and tiny, with eyes wide with hunger and curiosity as they watched the busy stalls and the food being sold. Every now and then, they whispered among themselves, heads ducked low, as if trying not to draw attention to themselves. It was clear to anyone who would look at them to know what they were planning to do. A smile tugged at Chen Ren's lips. They were the ones he was looking for. After a long, exhausting day of crunching numbers and balancing ledgers at the city lord's palace, Scholar Lu Wen emerged from the building, his mind still buzzing with calculations. The sun hung low in the sky, reminding him how long it had been since he walked inside the building. His stomach rumbled loudly, again reminding him that he hadn't had a chance to eat lunch. He grimaced slightly, rubbing his hand over his belly as he considered grabbing some street food on the way home. He was young and hadn't gotten the chance to select a bride, which meant that if he went home like this, he would have to cook himself. That was the last thing Lu Wen wanted to do right now. All he needed was some good food and a bed to rest to get over the tiredness of the long day. As he stepped onto the cobblestone street, a shrill voice cut through the crowd. Free noodles. Free noodles on Market Street. Try it out today only. Special noodles from the Eastern tribes, now available right here in Cloud Mist City. For free. Lu Wen turned his head toward the source of the noise and spotted a young boy, his face streaked with dirt and his clothes worn and threadbare. The boy was standing on a crate, shouting with all his might. Despite his apparent shyness, he was doing his best to advertise, his eyes darting nervously over the growing crowd around him. The scholar adjusted his robes, glancing around at the people who had gathered to watch. Most of them were locals, their curiosity piqued by the promise of free food. The boy's proclamation had even caught the attention of a few wealthier passers-by, their eyes narrowed with interest. Lu Wen's gaze returned to the boy, and he couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. Clearly, the child was trying to earn some coin, but the mention of the Eastern tribe's cuisine had truly caught his attention. Lu Wen stroked his beard thoughtfully. The Eastern tribes were a mysterious lot, known for their seclusion and rugged lifestyle that lived east to Kalian Empire. They were hunters and warriors, living in the wilds, and often looked down upon as uncultured brutes by the refined citizens of the empire. Yet, there were always whispers about the quality of their food, robust flavors that could make even the most discerning palate dance in delightment. He had heard stories of spicy broths and smoky meats, dishes so flavorful that they lingered in one's memory long after the meal was over. It was said that they harvested special spices, making their meals a delight to feast on, and he knew a few emerging sects had tried to encroach upon their territory for the spices, but had been held back due to the terrain. Hence, their food was famous, especially among the upper class. Unfortunately, the opportunity to taste such exotic cuisine rarely presented itself in the empire, let alone in Cloud Mist City. As Lu Wen pondered over this unexpected chance, the boy's eyes met his. Seizing the moment, the boy pointed directly at him, his voice cracking slightly as he shouted, "Sir, if you want to try these special noodles, you better hurry to Market Street. Look for the stall with the red banner. If you don't go fast, the delicacy will run out." The boy's earnestness brought a smile to Lu Wen's lips. He knew a marketing ploy when he saw one, but the child's enthusiasm was contagious. And, truth be told, the scholar was intrigued. He had missed lunch, and his stomach growled again, this time with renewed vigor. A taste of the Eastern tribe's cuisine was an opportunity he couldn't pass up. Nodding to himself, he adjusted his hat and made his way toward Market Street, weaving through the crowd. He could hear the boy's voice behind him, still shouting, still pulling in more curious onlookers. As he walked, Lu Wen couldn't help but chuckle to himself. Today had been a trying day, but perhaps, just perhaps, it would end on a high note with a belly-full exotic dish. "Noodles," the child said. As he approached the center of Market Street, it didn't take long for him to spot the noodle stand. It was right opposite to the usual spot where he bought skewers from Old Man Tion. A man stood on a small wooden crate in front of a stall, his voice being the loudest of the noise of the crowd. "Free noodles. Free noodles. Eastern delicacy. Right here in Cloud Mist City. Come and get your free bowl today." The man's shout attracted quite a crowd. Lu Wen pushed his way gently through the people, his eyes scanning the scene. A young girl stood beside the man, carefully handing out bowls of steaming noodles to those who approached. The man looked oddly out of place among the typical street vendors. His clothes, while not extravagant, were far too fine for a commoner, giving him an air that contrasted sharply with the usual rough-and-tumble sellers that lined Market Street. Even his face held a certain charm, rare for the place. As Lu Wen moved closer, his eyes landed on a small sign propped up on the side of the stall, listing the prices, 5 coppers per bowl. Confused, he turned to the man standing on the crate. "Are the noodles free, or are they 5 coppers one?" he asked, pointing to the sign. The man smiled warmly, hopping down from his perch. "They're free today," he said cheerfully. "Would you like a bowl?" Lu Wen glanced around, observing the expressions of those already eating. The faces of the customers were filled with surprise and pleasure, and the aroma wafting from the stall was tantalizing. His gaze met with a woman who was savoring the dish as if it was her last meal. He almost gasped when she drank the broth in one go. He quickly withdrew his gaze and looked at the delicacy called noodles that he had never heard of before. They were long, thin strands swimming in a rich, fragrant broth that sizzled. His stomach grumbled once again, and he nodded. "Yes, I'll take a bowl." With a swift, practiced motion, the girl beside the man ladled a generous portion of noodles into a bowl and handed it over. "Here you go," she chirped, her eyes lit up. As Lu Wen accepted the bowl, the man behind the stall leaned forward slightly, his gaze friendly and curious. "I couldn't help but notice you read the sign. Are you a scholar or a learned man by chance?" Lu Wen raised an eyebrow, caught slightly off guard by the question. "Yes, I am a scholar," he replied. "Do I look like one?" The man chuckled, nodding. "Indeed, you do. You have the air of a distinguished gentleman, someone well-versed in the ways of the world." His words were smooth, his tone sincere, and Lu Wen couldn't help but feel a small swell of pride at the compliment. "Thank you," he said, a slight smile tugging at his lips. It wasn't every day that his scholarly status was acknowledged outside of the palace. He took a moment to study the man again, still puzzled by his refined demeanor. "Well, please enjoy," the man continued, gesturing to the bowl in Lu Wen's hands. "If you like the noodles, please mention them to your colleagues at the City Lord's palace," he suggested. "I'm sure they would love to try it too." Lu Wen nodded, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "I will, if I like it," he replied, taking his first proper bite of the noodles. As the soft, chewy strands melted in his mouth, His eyebrows shot up in surprise. The noodles had a delightful texture, with just the right amount of firmness, and the broth. Oh, the broth. It was rich and full of complex flavors that danced on his tongue. If he didn't know better, he'd be tearing up for how good the noodles were. There were a few vegetables in it, and they were cooked to perfection, just tender enough to bite through but still retaining a satisfying crunch. They provided a refreshing contrast to the rich, savory broth that soaked into the noodles. He quickly dug in for another bite and another, finding each mouthful better than the last. In what felt like no time at all, he had finished the entire bowl, but his hunger was far from satiated. Without a second thought, he looked up at the vendor and said, "Give me one more." It was excellent. The vendor, still smiling, shook his head. "I'm afraid each person can only have one free bowl. However, if you'd like another, you can purchase it for 5 coppers. Also, you actually tried our vegetable rice noodles that come at 7 coppers per bowl." Lu Wen glanced around, considering his options. He could see other food stalls nearby with skewers and buns, but the lingering taste of the noodles on his tongue made his decision for him. He felt a craving that wouldn't be satisfied by anything else. With a small sigh of defeat, he reached into his pouch and tossed the coins onto the counter. "Sure, take it," he said, unable to hide his eagerness. The vendor's smile widened. "Thank you. I'll make this bowl myself," he said, turning to prepare another serving. Lu Wen watched as the man skillfully scooped the noodles and broth into a fresh bowl. The way he moved spoke of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. In moments, another steaming bowl was placed in front of him, and Lu Wen wasted no time digging in. After turning away the last group of customers that had arrived too late to try the free noodles, Chen Ren turned and walked over to a small group huddled around a wooden bench. The children who had been shouting in the streets earlier were now seated, each with a bowl of noodles in hand, eagerly slurping down their meal. The young girl who had been the most suspicious of him before looked at the noodles with glinting eyes, her face bright as she ate. He crouched down beside them and gently patted the girl on the head. "You all did well today," he said warmly. "Keep up the good work." "Thank you," the young girl yelled in happiness. She slurped the last bit of the broth. Chen Ren stood up, looking down at the children with a satisfied nod. As he turned back toward his stall, he felt a sense of fulfillment wash over him. Not only had his plan to attract more customers worked, but he had also been able to provide a little kindness to those who needed it most. For him, that was a reward far greater than any amount of silver or gold. But still, business is business. Thanks to his clever scheme, most of the noodles he had prepared for the day were sold out, drawing in a steady stream of curious customers. The promise of free noodles had lured them in, and, as expected, a fair number had come just to try something new without spending a coin. However, 6 of them had been so impressed that they purchased a second bowl, earning him a modest 34 copper coins. He was still at a loss with how much the pounds of rice had cost, but he didn't care about it. As the day wound down and the crowd thinned, Chen Ren assessed the stall's remaining supplies, realizing they were nearly out of everything. It was a good problem to have, he thought, given this was only the first day. He had hoped to create a buzz, and it seemed like his plan was working. As he instructed Tang Xilan to pack up the stall, he saw a shadow fall over him. Though he'd like it if it was a customer, it was Old Man Tian, one of the longtime street vendors who had seen many young and hopeful food vendors come and go. His words to be exact. "You got quite a lot of customers today, young master," he remarked, eyeing the empty noodle pots. "People do like free food." Chen Ren didn't take offense at the comment, instead replying with a shrug, "They do. And if it's good, they'll come back." Old Man Tian scratched his chin thoughtfully. "I don't know about that. People paying for something and getting it for free are two different things. When they get something for free, they're often reluctant to pay for it next time." Chen Ren nodded, understanding the point. "True, but only if the product isn't good enough for them to feel it's worth paying for. We'll see how things go tomorrow, one way or another." Old Man Tian raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Are you really planning to be back here tomorrow?" "I will be," he replied confidently. The old man nodded, his lips curling into a knowing smirk as if he thought this young, new, idealistic, foolish young master was wasting his time. "Well, Good luck to you then, he said before turning and walking away, his gait slow but steady. As old man Tian disappeared into the crowd, Tang Xilan turned to Chen Ren. He's not exactly wrong, you know. We sold out because it was free. But we're going to take a big loss if this keeps up. I know, he replied, glancing around at the remaining ingredients and the coins he had made. But it was just a one-day thing to get the word out. Besides, I don't have much money left to keep this up for long. He paused, thinking about the meager funds he had managed to scrape together. Over the past few days, he had scrounged through his clothes and belongings, finding about 8 silver when hidden in various pockets and pouches. It wasn't much, but it was all he had to keep his fledgling business afloat. If things didn't turn around soon, he might have to start selling his clothes just to get by. But my plan wasn't just to give out free food to spread the word, he continued. There's more to it than that. You'll see tomorrow. I'm pretty confident old man Tian is going to be in for a big surprise. Tang Xilan frowned at that. Her mouth opened and closed as if she was deciding if she should ask. Chen Ren patiently waited until she pursed her lips only to open them and question. Oh, what are you planning? You'll have to wait and see. Let's just say I have a few tricks up my sleeve. With that, he finished packing up the stall, his mind already racing with ideas for the next day. Tang Xilan shook her head, already having predicted his answer. Chen Ren knew he had taken a risk for the business with the current amount of equity they had by giving out free food, but he was betting on the quality of his noodles and the curiosity of the people. If he could turn that curiosity into regular customers, then today's investment would be well worth it. And if things went according to plan, tomorrow would be a turning point, one that even old man Tian wouldn't see coming. Chapter 7. Booming Business. Tang Xilan wiped her brow as she and Chen Ren finished the day's work. The sun had already long set, calming things around the courtyard from the busy state that they'd been in the morning, but she still had some energy left. She helped Chen Ren carry the stall and bowls back to the guest courtyard. Despite her initial reluctance, she had grown accustomed to their routine, though she still found his behavior puzzling. Once they had set everything down, Chen Ren turned to her with a small smile. Thanks for the help, Xilan. I appreciate it. I will see you tomorrow. Tang Xilan nodded, caught off guard by his politeness yet again. No matter how many times he thanked her or spoke to her kindly, she couldn't quite get used to it. It wasn't just the words, but the way he looked at her, as if she were a person, not just a mortal to be looked down upon. It was an unfamiliar sensation coming from Chen Ren, who only ever treated people as livestock rather than humans. She recalled when he had first come to live with Chen Clan and had nearly crippled a maid because she had dared to take out his clothes to wash without asking. Although he had spared her later on, Tang Xilan still recalled the look in his eyes. But now he was different. Like always, she wondered upon the reason for this transformation. There were only a few times in her life when she had seen people changing to this degree. Most of those moments revolved around the other maids or young girls from Tang Clan who would change drastically after getting their hearts broken by guys who never wanted to take responsibilities. They would then grow bitter, becoming shadows of their real selves. Maybe Chen Ren was like that too. Maybe his own heartbreak was the fight he lost, the one that seemed to have changed him so completely. She didn't know all the details, but she could see it in his eyes. Whatever pride or arrogance he once had seemed to have been stripped away, replaced by a quiet grit that was hard to ignore. The only difference was that rather than growing bitter, he had gained humanity and humility, things she never expected him to ever possess. As these thoughts ran through her mind, Tang Xilan began her walk towards the main manor. Her feet moved almost automatically along the familiar path, the stone walkway worn smooth by weather and years of use. The manor was right ahead, a grand structure of carefully done woodwork and stone walls that seemed imposing. Carvings of dragons and phoenixes covered the eaves, their fierce gazes seeming to watch over the clan and protect them from calamities. The roof tiles were a deep, dark blue, catching the last light of the sun and reflecting it in a soft glow. She passed through a smaller gate that led to the inner courtyard. It wasn't her quarters, but she had business here today. As she approached the gate to the main building, she saw 2 guards standing at attention. They nodded to her as she came closer, their expressions neutral. "Wait here for a minute," one of them said, already familiar with her visits. Tang Xiulan waited patiently, her thoughts still on Chen Ren and the peculiar path his life seemed to be taking. A minute later, the guard returned and motioned for her to enter. Taking a deep breath, she stepped through the gate and into the main hall. The room had just a few candles flickering in the corners. The air was thick with the scent of incense, a constant in the Tang manor. In the center of the room sat an older man, his hair gray and thinning, his cheeks sunken and pale. A neatly trimmed mustache framed his thin lips, giving him an appearance that was hard to read. This was the head of the Tang clan, the young Miss Father, Tang Jihao. He looked up as Tang Xiulan entered, his eyes sharp despite his frail appearance. Tang Xiulan bowed deeply and tried her best to keep her voice steady as she spoke. "I am here to report." Tang Xiulan kept her head bowed for a moment longer before speaking. "Young Master Chen Ren started his stall today," she began, her voice clear but respectful. "He managed to sell all the noodles he had prepared." The old man's eyes widened slightly, his gaze sharpening as he looked at her. "All of them?" he asked, his tone incredulous. "How?" Tang Xiulan nodded, and then gave a brief summary of Chen Ren's marketing techniques. She started by saying how he didn't get a lot of customers at first, but used the slum-dwelling kids to advertise free noodles in exchange for feeding them. He also attached the label of it being a delicacy from the eastern tribes. Once people heard about free food, quite a lot of them came to try, and according to Chen Ren, they were going to spread word of mouth, and the noodles will start to do better and better. "It was a surprise to me," she admitted, "but he seemed to think it would help with the sales starting tomorrow." Tang Jihao listened carefully, nodding as she spoke. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and asked, "These noodles, are they actually from the tribes?" "I did ask him," Tang Xiulan replied. "But the young master said it doesn't matter if they are or not. People just need to believe they're an exotic delicacy. It's not like the tribes are going to come to Cloud Mist City to do anything about it." At that, a small smile appeared on the old man's lips. "Chen Ren is more brazen than I expected," he mused, "but also smart." His expression grew thoughtful. "Is he still acting strange?" Tang Xiulan nodded again. "Yes, master. His personality has changed. I don't think it's a facade. If it were, he would have let it slip by now. But he hasn't." Tang Jihao's eyes narrowed. His sunken eyes seemed to look scarier, but Tang Xiulan didn't let it show it on her face. "That's interesting. If his personality truly has changed, then perhaps it's worth not kicking him out just yet." Tang Xiulan hesitated for a moment before speaking up. "Master, may I ask something?" He glanced at her, curious. "Go ahead." "Why don't you just kick him out?" she asked. "Is it because of the young miss?" Tang Jihao's smile returned, a hint of amusement in his eyes. He didn't answer immediately, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make Tang Xiulan wonder if she had overstepped. Then, finally, he spoke. "Partly, yes. At least, that was the case when Chen Ren first walked in. It seemed like a golden opportunity to tie my daughter to a cultivator. As you know, she didn't have the gift of immortality in her body, and with her marrying a cultivator, at least the future generations will have a better chance. But with Chen Ren's personality back then, I threw that idea away. He was arrogant, reckless, definitely not the kind of person I wanted to associate with my daughter." He paused, rubbing his beard. "Even now, with his new personality, I'm not rushing into anything. It's not been long enough to see if the change is permanent. But I have to admit, it's the first time I've seen a cultivator take an interest in business, especially one like a street stall. Most cultivators don't see beyond selling pills or beast parts, and they usually keep to their sects or clan. So, I really want to see what Chen Ren aims to achieve with this. Even if the man is, or was, a wastrel, he's still a cultivator. It's quite unusual for someone like that to end up selling something as simple as these noodles. It suggests something major has happened to him. I know of his clan and they are an aggressive bunch, so him being a merchant is just going against everything his clan stands for." Tang Xiulan slowly took in those words. Her master wasn't wrong. Since Cloud Mist City was the closest place to Soaring Sword Sect, a guardian sect, there were a good number of cultivators in the city, and out of all of them, Chen Ren had slowly turned the strangest. "I'll keep being with him, and keep an eye out, master." The old man gave a small smile and nodded. "Good. But tell me, are the noodles actually good?" I've heard from the servants that they are, but it wouldn't be proper for the head of the Tang clan to line up at a stall to eat. He chuckled softly. Tang Xiulan suppressed a smile, a bit of amusement flickering in her eyes. Of course, she thought to herself, the master was a gourmet. She bowed again, hiding her amusement. I'll make sure to bring some for you, master. Tang Jihao nodded, satisfied. Good. I look forward to trying them. Now, go on, and let me know if you notice anything else strange with Chen Ren. Tang Xiulan bowed once more before leaving the room, a small smile tugging at her lips. For all his sternness, Master Tang could never resist good food. The next day, Chen Ren was up early, ready to start the stall once again. Thanks to the foresight of soaking the additional rice he had brought from Tang Yuqiu yesterday, he was able to open earlier than yesterday. A part of him was eager to catch the morning crowd, those on their way to work or leaving their homes for various errands. He wanted to see if he could attract some early customers with his noodles. As always, Old Man Tian was already there, a constant presence in the early hours. He gave a short bow to Chen Ren when he saw him strolling up with Tang Xiulan by his side. Chen Ren returned the gesture with a nod but didn't say much. Instead, he busied himself setting up the stall, arranging the bowls and preparing the ingredients for the day. Once everything was ready, Chen Ren sat down, waiting with calm patience. Occasionally, he would call out to people rushing by who cast curious glances at his stall. His voice was friendly but firm, a gentle nudge to consider stopping for a bowl of noodles. Despite his efforts, the morning was slow. Throughout the early hours, he managed to sell only 2 bowls, far fewer than the other stalls nearby. Still, a smile lingered on Chen Ren's face as he waited, his eyes occasionally drifting to the street, watching the flow of people. Tang Xiulan noticed this and tilted her head, puzzled. Why do you look so happy, young master? She asked, getting more casual with him by the day. Chen Ren turned to her, his smile widening slightly. I'm just anticipating lunchtime, he replied. Things should start to change then if I'm right. From what I know, a lot of people go out to eat at local restaurants and stalls during lunch, at least those who don't own their own shops in their homes. And if the marketing from yesterday worked as expected, then they'll be looking to try my noodles today. As he spoke, he could feel a sense of anticipation bubbling in his heart and nerves. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the real test of his efforts. The free food wasn't just to spread word of mouth in the common public. He had deliberately sent the kids to areas where a lot of people worked together, such as the places with big forges, the city lord offices, and other similar areas. If he was right, then if even a few of his customers from yesterday had done what they promised, he would be quite busy as the day went by. He glanced at the sun climbing higher in the sky, marking the approach of midday. Please, don't let me down. Lu Wen stretched his arms above his head, feeling the tension release from his shoulders as lunchtime finally arrived. He bent further and heard his spine crack. Ah, the relief. Soon, it turned into embarrassment when his stomach rumbled, a clear sign that it was time to find something to eat. He made his way out of the office where he worked, joining the steady stream of people leaving their own workspaces in search of a meal. Everyone who worked in the city lord's office had specific things they liked during lunch. Some would bring their own lunch, but most would go out to eat in nearby restaurants and stalls. There were also those who were loyal to specific places and would eat similar things every day. He wasn't one of them, liking to savor different kinds of food. As Lu Wen moved down the street, he found himself walking beside a group of fellow workers, deep in discussion about lunch plans. Zhang Wei, Lin Feng, and Yuang Bo, a close friend trio that would always hang out for lunch, were talking very loudly. Should we try something different today? Zhang Wei suggested, his eyes twinkling with the thought of lunch itself. I heard there's a new place by the river that serves amazing dumplings. Lin Feng, who walked in the middle, shook his head. I'm in the mood for something simple, he said, his tone decisive. How about the chicken skewers from the stall on the corner? Can't go wrong with those. Or maybe some hot buns. I heard they have a new filling today. Yuang Bo's excitement was palpable, and he rubbed his hands together, imagining the taste. The three continued their animated debate, tossing around different ideas until Lu Wen felt that they noticed him walking quietly beside them. Hey Lu Wen, Yuan Bo called out, grinning. Where do you want to go for lunch? Lu Wen paused, suddenly remembering what the noodle stall owner had told him the day before about promoting his new stall. And truth be told, after tasting 2 bowls, he has been craving noodles ever since he started thinking about lunch. Actually, he began, trying to keep his voice casual, there's a new stall I heard about that's selling some kind of Eastern tribe delicacy. They call it noodles. Supposedly, it's really good. At this, Zhang Wei's eyes widened with interest. Noodles, you say? An Eastern tribe delicacy? He repeated, stroking his chin thoughtfully. I've never had anything like that before. Could be worth a try. Yeah, why not? I'm up for something different today. Lead the way, Lu Wan. Yuan Bo was practically bouncing on his feet. An adventure for the taste buds. Let's do it. Lu Wan smiled, pleased with their enthusiasm. As everyone was agreeable about trying out a new delicacy today, he found himself moving to the center of the group. He led them toward Market Street, where the noodle stall was set up. As they approached, he noticed something surprising. The area around the stall was already bustling with people, all eagerly slurping down noodles. The sight took him aback since he hadn't expected the stall to start doing such business in just a day. Just yesterday, they were giving out free noodles in a bid to attract people. Looks like we're not the only ones who heard about this place, Zhang Wei said, grinning as he took in the crowd. This must be the real deal. Lu Wen nodded, a smile spreading across his face. Looks like these noodles are going to be a big hit, he said aloud. His eyes moved towards the owner of the stall who was handing out the bowls one by one with a smile on his face. Everyone please get in a queue. It's first come, first serve. All of you are going to get noodles today, so just stand for a while and prepare your stomachs for the best dish you will ever eat. As Lu Wan and his group joined the line, the rich smell of freshly made noodles filled the air, and he could practically taste the delicacy all over again. Chapter 8. First Employee. The line of customers moved at a steady pace as they were being given bowls of rice noodles one after another. Chen Ren felt the stall buzzing like a hive with the people who continued to come and go, making his grin grow wider. Every time someone grabbed a bowl of steaming hot rice noodles, the sound of coins clinking into his hands was a sweet melody, the gratification of his hard work to make those dishes. What made it even sweeter was the sight of Tang Xilan glancing at him from time to time. All the while something akin to admiration sparkled in her eyes. Even old man Tian, who never treated his idea of running a stall seriously, stood frozen at a distance, mouth slightly opened while staring at the crowd gathered around his stall. Although Chen Ren took pride in what he had done in such a short time, he didn't let the attention he received swell his ego. With each bowl he served, he flashed a welcoming smile, heartfully thanking every customer and urging them to spread the word about his stall. Please tell your friends about the stall, he said with a chuckle. Come back tomorrow if you like it. I'll have more ready. Some nodded at his words, while others, lost in the flavor of the noodles, barely acknowledged him. But none left disappointed, a fact he didn't miss. He knew that regardless of their gratitude or the way they showed it at the end, he gained profits by selling the noodles, and in return, the customer's hunger satiated. That was all that mattered. As he reached for the next bowl, he recognized someone from yesterday. There, standing before him, was the scholar who had bought an extra bowl from him, the one who he had requested to spread the word. Behind the scholar was a small group of people, clearly drawn by his recommendation. The scholar's knowing smile didn't go unnoticed by Chen Ren. Ah, it's you again. Welcome back, he said, his eyes lighting up as he gave a subtle nod towards the small group behind the scholar. Looks like your words worked wonders. The scholar gave a polite smile. I just told the truth. Your noodles speak for themselves. Ah, thank you anyway. So, 1 bowl of rice noodles today? Yes, here's 5 coppers. He pulled 5 coppers from his pocket and handed them over. As Chen Ren handed the scholar a bowl and collected the money, a strange warmth flooded in his chest. It wasn't just any warmth. He felt his chi stirred, pulsing within his dantian in a way he hadn't felt before. He blinked, the sensation catching him off guard, but quickly shook it off. Thank you. The scholar's voice pulled him out of his thought process. Chen Ren nodded with equal enthusiasm and focused on the rest of the crowd. Soon after, he found himself back to distributing bowls one after another. As the lunch crowd thinned, more satisfied customers left the stall with full bellies and content laughter. Each time Chen accepted their payment, the surges in his qi became more frequent, swirling stronger with every interaction. The energy in his core felt alive, almost reacting to the success of his little business. It was an odd feeling altogether because he didn't know why it was happening and what triggered his qi to swirl inside him like that. But there wasn't time to dwell on whatever was happening. By the time the rush ended, Chen Ren had sold nearly 24 bowls. Wiping his brow, he turned to Tang Xiulan, who was covered in sweat, brows raised, but he didn't miss the satisfied smile on her face. "Good job today," he said, patting her on the shoulder. "We've got a bit of a break now before the evening crowd rolls in. Let's take it easy until then." "Your trick worked better than I expected, young master." Chen Ren laughed. "If it didn't, I would have had to try something else. But this is only the beginning. We've got to keep it up." As he spoke, movement caught the corner of his eye. A few kids stood nearby, watching the stall with wide eyes from an alley. They seemed hesitant to approach him, but they were firmly fixated on him. Those were the same kids whom he had asked for help before, the ones who agreed to spread the word in return for free food. He waved them over with a grin. "Hey, you all up for helping out again today? Same deal as tomorrow." Their eager nods were all the answer he needed. As the evening rolled in, the crowd grew larger than the day before. "Please give me a bowl. Is this the noodle stall I heard about?" Some kids had been shouting about it all over town, talking about how it's an Eastern delicacy. "Let's try and see how it is." People gathered around Chen Ren's stall, eager to try his noodles. Some were new faces, while others had returned for a second helping. Word of mouth was spreading like water ripples in a still pond, touching everyone in the path, and the kids he had recruited earlier were doing a great job promoting his business. Their lively voices rang through the city, calling out praises for his noodles, bringing in even more customers. He felt relieved as he watched the growing line. If things continued like this, he'd be able to chip away at his debts sooner than he thought. Of course, that was still a distant goal, but he was finally beginning on something, and it had even started to work. Chen Ren believed that one simply needed to focus on their present, and the future would change accordingly to that. With that belief in mind, he kept at the stall. By the moment they reached evening, they had sold an additional 40 bowls, far exceeding his expectation. In fact, they ran out of noodles much earlier than planned, forcing them to close the stall and heavy-heartedly rejecting a few customers who had been waiting in line. It couldn't be helped since he hadn't bought the rice in bulk, not wanting to make such a big investment when the stall was still new. Though, now he could finally consider it. As Chen Ren began packing up, his eyes wandered around Old Man Tion's stall across the way, except it wasn't Old Man Tion manning it. A younger man who shared similar features with the skewer stall owner was tending to the customers. Probably his grandson. Curious, Chung called out. "Hello," he said. "Where's the old man today?" The young man glanced up, rubbing the back of his neck. "Ah, he's sick. Told me to cover for him." Chen Ren smiled, wondering if Old Man Tion had run away out of dejection from doubting him, but it wasn't a big deal. He would return tomorrow, and at that time, he wondered what sort of expression the old man would wear on his face. For now, there was nothing more to be done besides this small talk. He returned to his stall, making sure to feed the kids who had helped with the advertising. Their eager faces lit up as they slurped the leftover noodles, and he was glad to share this with them. They had been the most helpful, aside from the customers who were so pleased with the noodles that they spread the word on their own, without Chen Ren having to ask. After cleaning up, he finally left the market alongside Tang Xiulan. The sky was already darkening, and the air had cooled considerably. Other than a slightly sore throat from yelling all day, Chen Ren couldn't feel any sort of tiredness. His body still felt as energized as new, and he even had the energy to take a lap or two around the city. Undoubtedly, this was all due to him being a cultivator, and by this point, he was glad that he had been transmigrated in the body of one. It was the only good point about being Chen Ren after all. If he had been a normal person, he would have been like Tang Xiulan, who looked tired and walked slowly, probably because of her aching feet after standing in one position all day. He would have loved to lower her workload, but that would only happen if the stall got more customers. "We're gonna need way more rice to soak now," Chen Ren said, breaking the silence and glancing over at her. The demands only going up. Xiaolan nodded, a thoughtful look on her face. She waited for a few beats before she replied. I could talk to the young miss about it. See if we can get more supplies. Are you sure about that? He asked, a bit surprised. You've been following my orders all this time, but never asked to help out proactively. Don't tell me you fell in love with me? A faint blush crept onto her cheeks, but she didn't look away. Xiaolan hesitated for a moment, her head dipping slightly as she spoke. It's not that, young master. I wasn't sure of your plans at first, she admitted softly. I thought it was all just an act or ruse. But when I saw you making noodles day after day, using every trick to market and sell them, I realized you're serious about building a business. I want to help, if you'll let me. Chen Ren looked at her silently for a moment, then shifted his gaze toward the horizon, where the sun was setting in colors of red and orange. Then, in a calm voice, he asked, Is it because you genuinely want to help, or is it to win my trust so you can report back to the Tang clan head? Tang Xiaolan flinched, her eyes widening in surprise. Chen Ren's expression remained unreadable, but inside, he debated whether he should have asked her that question or not. No, it's better to reveal to her that I know it. There's no point hiding it. He already knew Tang Xiaolan acted as an informant for Tang Jihao since she had started following him around. It wasn't hard to figure out. He was living under someone else's roof, surrounded by servants that didn't work for him. Of course, everything he did would reach the ears of the Tang clan's head. And Xiaolan, being the closest to him, was the obvious informant. Honestly, he didn't like it. But Tang Xiaolan was extremely helpful, and he would simply struggle more if he didn't ask for any help and try to do everything himself. Either way, spying on him wasn't a hard thing, and until now, Tang clan had done nothing more to make them his enemies. Instead, they had been helpful by giving him a place to stay. But if he wanted to bring Tang Xiaolan closer to him, he needed to know her intentions better. Chen Ren waited patiently, watching her as she grappled with his accusation. After a long pause, she finally spoke, her voice shaky as she replied. I won't lie. I do report to the master. But I genuinely wish to work for you. Since I am a maid working for the Tang clan, it's inevitable that I can't hide anything from him, but I do enjoy making noodles and helping with the stall. If you let me, I want to be a part of its success, young master. Chen Ren nodded slowly, satisfied with her answer. At least she was being honest. If she didn't report to Tang Jihao, they'd just replace her with someone else, someone less trustworthy. He didn't want that. That's good enough, he said at last. From now on, you're my employee. Xiaolan blinked, clearly taken aback. Employee? Chen Ren chuckled. It means you'll be working for me, in my stall, and whatever other businesses I end up running. In return, I'll pay you. You can report whatever you want to the clan head as long as I'm living here, but from now on, you work for me. But I'm already getting paid by the clan, she said, still perplexed. This and that are different, Chen Ren replied, waving a hand dismissively. I can't pay you much since I'm still in debt, but I'll give you 5 silver a month. I'll raise it once I've cleared what I owe. Deal? Xiaolan stared at him for a moment, clearly not expecting him to offer payment. Her expression softened, and she nodded slowly. Yes, that's acceptable. Chen Ren gave her a satisfied nod. Good. Now, go get more rice. I'll be sitting in the courtyard for a while. Without another word, Tang Xiaolan bowed her head slightly and headed off, leaving Chen Ren standing alone as the last light of the day faded into dark. Chen Ren sat down on the stone bench in the courtyard, stretching his muscles as he looked up at the night sky. He took a few breaths, regulating his breathing and then loosening his hands. They had been working tirelessly all day. Although he was fine physically, he was still mentally drained. He let his legs fall to the sides and relaxed them forward. I feel like I'm progressing every day with my goal of making money. Today had been tougher than expected, but the sales had gone well, and he'd even managed to promote Xiaolan as his official employee. If he kept it going this way, he might be able to run the stall from day to night and even establish more branches. Cloudmist City was big, and Market Street wasn't the only place with street stalls. A small grin tugged at the corners of his lips as he thought about that. Still, now that the day was over, he had something else weighing on his mind. something he had pushed aside since arriving in this strange new world. He had been preoccupied with setting up the noodle stall, adjusting to his new life, and figuring out how things worked around here. But each night, he found himself poring over the cultivation manuals he'd stumbled upon while searching Chen Ren's belongings, trying to make sense of the realms and the challenges that came with them. Fighting had never been his thing. He wasn't the type who sought out conflict. But in this world, strength wasn't just a luxury. It was a necessity. Sure, he was confident in his ability to amass wealth, but cultivation strength? That was an entirely different game. His talent for cultivation was abysmal, yet he knew he needed to give it a shot, at least. Especially with the strange chi surges he'd been feeling throughout the day. It wasn't painful, but it was certainly odd. He wasn't even supposed to be able to sense chi at this level. The 9 realms of cultivation, as the manuals explained, were body forging, chi refinement, foundation establishment, meridian expansion, core formation, domain manifestation, nascent soul, deity transformation, and transcendence. Only at the 2nd realm, chi refinement, were cultivators typically able to sense chi. For most cultivators at his level, body forging, it wasn't possible to sense chi until they reached the 9th star, which was known as the chi perception stage. Until then, the focus was on strengthening the body, sharpening the mind, and chanting mantras to align with the cultivation path. But here he was, at the 3rd star of body forging, already able to sense chi like it was second nature. It made him wonder if his body had somehow gained a better talent through transmigration. He wasn't sure how that worked, but it was a theory that seemed increasingly likely. He closed his eyes, focusing inward, trying to peer into his own body to understand what was happening with the chi surges. But before he could delve too deeply, a sharp voice rang out, cutting through the quiet of the night. "Imposter, I have come to judge you." Chen Ren's entire body tensed, his deep focus disturbed, and he heard the thrum of his raging heartbeat in his ears. His eyes darted around the courtyard, scanning for the source of the unfamiliar voice, but there was no one in sight. Yet he could hear the sound of footsteps on the floor. His gaze dropped to the ground, wondering if one of the debtors had hired a cultivator with a technique to turn invisible to deal with him before he noticed someone on the floor. His eyes widened in shock. "Aren't you?" "I am Yalan," she continued, her flames flaring briefly as she spoke her name. "Now tell me, who are you?" He blinked, disbelief flooding him. How did she know? His first thought was to chalk it up to his laziness compared to the original Chen Ren, but something told him that wasn't it. His gaze dropped to the fire trailing along her tail once more. No, it had to be something else. Something about her. Some skill she possessed that allowed her to see through his facade. And now, that same skill had placed him under her scrutiny. Chen Ren hesitated, weighing his options. Should I lie, or confess the bizarre truth? One glance at the flames still licking at the cat's tail told him all he needed to know. He swallowed and spoke, his voice giving away the fact that he was nervous, even though he was just facing a damn cat. I don't know how I got here. I remember falling asleep, and the next thing I knew, I was Chen Ren. I have his memories, but I know they aren't mine. It's like remembering everything about someone else's life, but having no real connection to it. I didn't try to take over his body. It just happened. I didn't wish for it, nor do I understand how or why it happened. It was bizarre even for me. He watched the cat carefully, his pulse racing. Would she accept that answer? What if she didn't? His gaze stared beyond her, but there was no one else in the courtyard. Even if he shouted for help, it would take a swipe of her tail for the embers to burn him down. He had purposely avoided any places where he would be alone in case he got confronted by some debt collectors, but it never crossed his mind that there would be other forms of threats. As the seconds stretched out, his heartbeat thrummed in his chest and the flames around the cat's tail dimmed, imitating the last bits of dying fire. "So," she spoke finally, her eyes glowing faintly, "were you a powerful cultivator whose soul mistakenly took over Chen Ren's body in the process of ascension? I heard of such a case a century ago." Chen Ren shook his head immediately, choosing to be truthful. "No, I was just a mortal in my world. There's no concept of cultivation where I come from, except in books or games. Although it's just a hypothesis, I believe it's because our atmosphere doesn't have chi." Hearing that, Yalan paced around the floor for a few seconds. Her tail moved to the rhythm of her paws, making him want to reach out and pat her fur, but the flames stopped him from moving. Finally, she turned around and stared at Chen Ren. A chi-less world. Interesting. Probably one of the lower worlds that no one has heard about. She murmured before her gaze sharpened, focusing on him with a newfound curiosity. Then tell me, what have you been doing with those things you call noodles? His eyes lit up at the mention. Oh, those. I'm building a business, he said, a touch of excitement creeping into his voice. I'm trying to make enough to pay back the debts Chen Ren owed, so I can be debt-free as soon as possible. I didn't take them, but you know I can't just escape them no matter how unfair it is. After that, I plan to focus on earning more money, hopefully a lot more. Yalan's flames flickered again, but this time, it felt less like a threat and more like a signal of amusement. It dimmed once again, quicker than it had before. Money? Why? She asked, stretching the why a bit longer, while her head tilted to the side. You were a mortal, but now you're a cultivator. Why not focus on cultivation? Rise through the realms and claim whatever you desire. Artifacts, women, riches, it would all be within your reach. Chen Ren chuckled softly. That sounds tempting, ideal, even, but I don't have much of a choice right now. Cultivation is interesting, but making money is necessary. At my level, I can only hunt low-level beasts, and the debt hanging over Chen Ren's head isn't small. It would take me a while to pay it off that way, and be far more dangerous. You see, the knife is dangerously close to my neck, and I know it could strike at any moment. From what I've learned and already know about this world, that's the conclusion I've come to. He hesitated for a moment, then sighed. Besides, I've realized Chen Ren's talent isn't exactly remarkable. Yalan's fiery gaze softened as she gave a slight what looked like nod. I can understand that. Chen Ren was never blessed by the heavens. I almost pitied him in his childhood. But instead of challenging the heavens, he allowed them to crush him. The man grew bitter, more with each passing year. Her tail lashed sharply once before she shook her head. All right, I won't be exterminating you. At least, not until you reveal yourself to be a demon who's been lying this whole time. But I doubt it. Her eyes sparkled briefly, the flames around her tail snuffing out completely. Chen Ren let out a quiet sigh of relief, though he still watched her warily, curiosity bubbling beneath his calm exterior. Her words confirmed that she didn't consider him lying, or maybe she was simply choosing to let him be for now in order to keep him from panicking. There was no way to know, and hence, he focused on something else, finding out how she and Chen Ren had been related. There was no recent memory of him talking to a cat that could speak the mortal language. If there had been one, it would have certainly stood out. But, as he looked deeper and deeper, something eventually caught his attention. A vague memory of a cat lingered in Chen Ren's childhood. Could it be the one in front of him? But other than that, it seemed like the man didn't like cats at all, something that, in his opinion, should have been considered a crime. He glanced back at the cat. So, in return, can I ask you a few questions? I think it's only fair. Yalan tilted her head slightly, her expression inscrutable. She licked at her paw once. Sure, go on, she replied. I'll allow it. Chen Ren leaned forward, his curiosity driving him to ask the question that had been swirling in his mind the whole time. Despite giving himself time during their conversation to process everything, he couldn't ignore the fact that there were still things he didn't understand. Who are you exactly? And what's your relationship with Chen Ren? The cat straightened, her tail following the actions, and her eyes took on a deeper, more thoughtful glow. My name is Yalan, she began, her voice layered with boredom. Okay, but I already know that. I want to know more than your name. I am bound by a pact made with Chen Ren's ancestors. For hundreds of years, I have been tasked with watching over their descendants, acting as a protector of sorts. This pact has 70 years left on it, and by all means, I have expected Chen Ren to be the last one to have my otherwise costly services for free. Chen Ren listened intently, the pieces slowly falling into place as she continued. I've been with Chen Ren since he was a child, looking over him from the shadows. But, as you already know, I wasn't exactly successful in protecting him. Her tail twitched, betraying a hint of frustration. The boy was too stubborn, too full of pride. He ignored every bit of advice I offered him in his childhood and never liked me, wouldn't even acknowledge my presence most of the time. He was simply wallowing in despair over his parents' death. So, I simply followed him, silently, waiting for the day he'd come find me himself and listen. Her voice softened as she sighed, her little face scrunched up in frustration. But he died a meaningless death. His own idiocy sealed his fate. By the time he was brought to the Tang clan manor, he was almost lifeless. That was when I noticed your soul beginning to merge with his body. Chen Ren blinked, absorbing her words. So he had been right in his early conjectures. His soul had started to enter the body at the exact moment Chen Ren was on the verge of death, and she had been there, powerless to intervene. It also revealed that the cat was able to see souls, probably the reason she knew he wasn't the original Chen Ren. He did the mental maths. If the pact between Yalan and Chen Ren's ancestors was truly that old, then the cat was far more powerful than he had initially imagined. In the original Chen Ren, he hadn't been a simple fool, but the worst kind of fool. Not only had he ignored a protector who could have helped him rise, but he'd squandered a chance to grow stronger under her guidance. Truly, an idiot. It also explained something else. Now he understood how Chen Ren had made it to Cloud Mist City unscathed, even without guards. Yalan had been watching over him the entire time, silently keeping him alive. He glanced at her again, curiosity gnawing at him. So, does the pact extend to me too? As soon as the question left his lips, he was rewarded with silence. Just silence that stretched far longer than what he was comfortable with. Yalan didn't respond, her fiery eyes narrowing in contemplation. Maybe I asked something that I shouldn't have? She doesn't seem unreasonable, but you hardly know in this world. He held back a frown. But before he could retract the question, she shook her head. I have no idea. The voice came out so low that if Chen Ren hadn't been attentive, it would have run past his ears. The pact should remain in effect as long as Chen Ren is alive. Since you carry remnants of his soul, he isn't technically dead. She paused, her tail flicking absently. It's a very blurry line. Chen Ren nodded slowly, unsure of what to make of her response. On one hand, the pact stood, barely, which likely meant she wouldn't or couldn't hurt him. But on the other hand, he doubted she harbored any real care toward him. After all, he was someone else. Their relationship was complicated, a tangled mess he had no desire to unravel right now. It hurt his mind just to think, and unfortunately, he couldn't simply give her tuna to win her over. Hence, he decided to stick to the reason he had come here. Turning his gaze to the cat, he asked, Do you mind if I cultivate for a bit? Yalan flicked her tail dismissively as if shrugging off the question, hopping onto the bench beside him. Go on, she said casually, as though his request was of no real importance. All right then. Chen Ren tried to ignore her presence and focused inward. His strange meeting with the cat bothered him, especially because she had been keeping a close watch on him. Having a spirit beast that could potentially kill you in one blow next to you, while you try to cultivate, wasn't exactly a great way to concentrate. It took him half an hour before he dispelled some of his nervousness and focused on the faint surges of energy in his dantian. The feeling was refreshing, like a tender warmth filling him from the inside. He tried to probe the energy, to manipulate it, but his control was clumsy. Frustratingly so. He shifted tactics, attempting to absorb the chi in the air around him. He could sense it faintly, like a whisper just out of reach, but no matter what he did, the energy refused to respond. Even when he chanted Thunderstorm Sutra, the Chen family's cultivation technique, it was like trying to catch smoke with his bare hands. Nothing worked. As he continued to struggle, the silence was finally broken by Yalan's voice. What exactly are you doing? Chen Ren sighed, opening his eyes and glancing at her. Cultivation, he said flatly. Yalan's tail swished lazily. You're in the body-forging realm, she remarked, her tone dismissive. Cultivating like this won't get you far. At your stage, you can't sense chi properly, nor can you circulate it through your meridians. You need to focus on training your body, slowly pushing it to the peak of body forging before you even begin to sense chi. Chen Ren, mid-breath, interrupted her, his voice calm but firm. I can already feel qi. Yalan froze. Her eyes narrowed, and the lazy swish of her tail stopped mid-air. What did you just say? She asked, her voice low, sharp with sudden intensity. Chen Ren blinked, surprised at her reaction. I can feel qi, he repeated, uncertain why it seemed to shock her so much. He knew it was unusual, but by her reaction, he might have massively underestimated such an ability in this realm. The cat's gaze bore into him, her eyes narrowing further as though she were reassessing everything about him. Chapter 10. Dao of Money? Chen Ren frowned as he struggled to explain the strange phenomenon that had been happening to him in the last few days. It took a while for him to get everything out as he thought back to how he had been feeling different since he had first started his stall. I didn't notice it at first, but I've been feeling something in my dantian these days. It's faint, like a soft pulse, but it's there. I can sense qi in the air too, though it's barely noticeable. Yalan's eyes narrowed, her eyes sparkling lightly. She licked her mouth. Was she amused? You sure you're not just filling your head with air? She asked, a smirk playing on her feline lips. It was already odd that a cat could speak even better than some humans, but the fact that he could understand her emotions felt like an out-of-the-world experience. Then again, everything here was out of the ordinary. Chen Ren shook his head firmly and got back to the topic. No, it's real. It's faint, but I can feel it. The cat studied him for a moment before giving a small flick of her tail. Close your eyes, she commanded. Chen Ren hesitated. Why? She hissed at that question, clearly unsatisfied by Chen Ren's response. You don't need to worry. If I had any intention of harming you, you wouldn't even take a single step before it was over. A chill ran down his spine at her words, and with a reluctant nod, he closed his eyes. Silence stretched between them before the cat's voice broke through again. Do you feel anything now? Chen Ren focused, but behind his closed eyelids, there was only a vast emptiness. He could hear the faint rustle of the wind, smell the damp earth beneath him, and feel the breeze brush past him, but it was as if he didn't exist like a ghost in the night. All his concentration was for nothing. No trace of what she wanted him to find. No swirl of qi, not even a slight ripple in the air. No, he replied, trying not to sound frustrated. How about now? Yalan's voice seemed to hum with a strange energy. Suddenly, he felt a shift. A wave of qi had gathered and bunched up around him. His senses sharpened, picking up the energy, however weak. Yes, he breathed. I can feel it now. It's like something pressing in around me, but not physically. It's mystical in nature. Okay, open your eyes. When he opened his eyes, he found the cat watching him with an intensity that erased her usual demeanor. Her tail stood straight, completely still, as if she were a guard on high alert. It seems like you really can sense it, she said, very slowly. Chen Ren exhaled, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. I told you, he said, before taking a pause, rethinking the words she told him a while ago. So, if most people can't do this, does that mean I'm actually special? The thought hung in the air, the idea of having some hidden talent gnawing at him. He might not have gotten a system like if this were a video game, but if he could gain some special talent with sensing qi, he might just be able to progress faster than what he had initially assumed. Yalan's eyes gleamed for a moment before she meowed softly. It sounded more like a scoff than a noise coming from a cat. Special? Don't get ahead of yourself, she said. But there was a flicker of something else in her gaze, a quiet acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, there was more to him than she had first believed. Well, partly, maybe, but I've seen geniuses who could sense qi from childhood. I'm not sure if you're one of them, but I believe it more that being from another plane has made you more sensitive to qi. She moved towards the left gracefully from where she was, pacing in thought before turning to him. There's another thing, though. Chen Ren's brows furrowed. What? Yalan's tail flicked as she explained. Cultivators often feel bursts of qi or sense it swirling when they practice their Dao. It also happens when they experience a breakthrough. After all, a Dao is the path a cultivator walks on, and as they progress, they gain insights, small or large, depending on their mastery of it. Chen Ren thought for a moment, his face twisted in confusion. Even so, it doesn't add up. I wasn't practicing any martial arts or swinging a sword when it happened. I was distributing rice noodles or running my stall. Why would my chi flare up then? The cat gave him a sidelong glance. Dao of noodles? She said in the most serious tone possible. Chen Ren chuckled lightly. I doubt that's it, he said. Whatever it is, I just hope I don't end up with a Dao that I have no interest in. Yalan shook her head, her tone returning to seriousness. That won't happen. A Dao is a path you walk upon yourself. No one else can choose it for you. After all, it's a long journey and it's yours, not anyone else's. You should meditate and reflect on your Dao. Think about the path you're meant to follow. But I don't even know what Dao I have. The cat's gaze softened slightly, almost as if teaching a child. Then consider which Dao you want. The Chen Ren before you walk the martial Dao, but clearly, that path was lost. You are not him. You need to search for what you desire, what you seek, deep within yourself. Chen Ren nodded, settling into a cross-legged position as he closed his eyes, focusing inward. The cat's words echoed in his mind, urging him to think about his Dao, the path he wanted to follow. His thoughts drifted naturally toward the martial Dao. In a world of cultivators, it was the logical choice, wasn't it? The quickest route to power in a dog-eat-dog world. Yet, the more he considered it, the more he realized how ill-fitting that path was for him. He adapted well, so given time, he might be able to come around the martial Dao, but would winning in fights make him happy? Even if he ignored the fact that he would be risking his life every day, his natural talent of 21 spirit roots was too low for any sect to look at him nicely. Moreover, he had already strayed far from the martial path, choosing a very different route. Business. Earning money, managing his noodle stall, paying off debts. He was more of a merchant than a warrior. If any Dao suited him, it had to be that. As he pondered, he felt a sudden stir in his dantian. The chi within him began to swirl more intensely as if resonating with his thoughts. He kept at it, focusing on the vision of his products flourishing, the coins piling up, and his success growing as he built a name for himself. He imagined expanding his business, using the wealth to improve himself, his connections, and his life. He imagined creating more products from Earth, slowly taking over the mortal market before looking at the sections. He imagined creating his own company. The more his thoughts moved in that direction, the more his chi swirled inside of him. Then, a chill ran down his spine. His eyes snapped open. He was no longer in the courtyard. Instead, he floated in a vast, endless space filled with stars, each one twinkling like a distant diamond. He hovered, weightless, in this unfamiliar realm. The silence was profound, and for a moment, he was entranced by the beauty of it all. What is this place? Chen Ren whispered, his voice swallowed by the void. As if in response to his question, the stars around him began to move. Slowly at first, then faster, shifting in strange patterns. The energy within him swirled violently, and as he looked up, the stars coalesced into a shape, a massive, serpentine figure. His breath caught in his throat. A dragon. Its enormous form twisted through the starry expanse, vibrating with power. Its eyes locked onto him, and Chen Ren felt an overwhelming wave of fear wash over him. This wasn't just an illusion. This was something else, something greater. Fear, cold and raw, clawed at his insides. This wasn't a dream. It was a reality more terrifying than anything he'd ever known. The dragon let out a deafening roar, a sound that shook the very fabric of existence. Its celestial form lunged towards him, the stars scattering like startled fireflies. Chen Ren's body froze in terror. His blood ran cold. He was trapped, a helpless speck in the dragon's cosmic maw. Panic surged through him, but his body refused to move. As the dragon's shadow loomed over him, he squeezed his eyes shut, a silent scream trapped behind his lips. And then, he woke up. Gasping for breath, his eyes flew open, and he found himself back in the courtyard, the faint scent of grass and the cool night air grounding him. His heart pounded in his chest as if he had just escaped death. What just happened? Chen Ren blinked, staring up at the night sky. His breathing was heavy, and sweat beaded on his forehead as he sat up from the bench, holding his head to steady himself. His mind raced, trying to comprehend what had just happened. That dragon, the stars, the overwhelming fear. It all felt so real. He took deep breaths, one after another, before the cat's voice made him turn towards her. "So," Yalan said casually, perched on the bench, "it seems you actually managed to connect to your Dao." Chen Ren's eyes flickered towards her, still dazed.
What?
The cat hopped down gracefully and padded closer, her amber eyes gleaming in the moonlight. "Just an hour ago, when you were meditating, you let out a massive surge of qi. You made a breakthrough," she explained, her tone matter-of-fact. "You're now a 4th-star body-forging cultivator." Chen Ren blinked, processing the information slowly. A breakthrough? Just like that? He still couldn't wrap his head around it. That terrifying vision, that dragon. Had all of that somehow pushed him to a new level? The cat nodded, her tail swaying lazily behind her. "Yes, it's rare for a cultivator to skip an entire stage in the body-forging realm, but I guess your connection to your Dao must have been strong enough. You finally aligned with it." For a moment, Chen Ren could only sit there, taking it all in. His heart still raced, but now he noticed something else, a warm energy coursing through his body. It was subtle at first, but then it hit him all at once. His body felt brimming with vitality, like he could take on the world. His muscles twitched and flexed with energy, his mind was sharp, and a rush of positivity surged through him, making everything feel possible. So this is what it's like to break through. He exhaled, marveling at the sensation. No wonder cultivators meditate for hundreds of years, just to feel this again and again. Before he could lose himself in the feeling, the cat interrupted with a curious tilt of her head. "What Dao did you connect to, anyway?" Chen Ren didn't answer immediately, still replaying the images in his mind. The swirling stars, the dragon, and that strange vastness of space. Then it clicked, and the answer was clear as day. His lips twitched into a small smile as he spoke, almost amused by the absurdity of it all. "The Dao of Money." Yalan stared at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Dao of Money?" The morning sun stretched its golden arms across the horizon over Cloud Mist City as Chen Ren and Tang Xilan set up the noodle stall. The familiar clatter of pots and wooden stools echoed through the quiet street, and the air was already carrying the faint scent of noodles as Chen Ren arranged his ingredients with practiced hands. His energy felt vibrant today, surging through him in waves, a direct result of the breakthrough from last night. He could hardly contain the bounce in his steps. Tang Xilan paused, her sharp eyes catching his unusually light movements. "Young master, you seem to be in a happy mood today," she remarked, tying her apron as she helped set up the stall. Chen Ren chuckled, shaking his head as he adjusted the display. "It's because I had some cultivation gains yesterday," he said, his voice filled with pride. "And also, our stall is picking up steam. I have a feeling with the amount of noodles we have today, we'll be working non-stop until night." Xilan nodded, a glint of approval in her gaze. "It'll be good then. More customers, more coins." Chen Ren nodded and continued setting up the stall, and just then, a sudden movement caught his eye. The white cat, Yalan, sleek and graceful as ever, leapt onto the counter, landing lightly next to him. Her eyes flicked over the setup before she curled up, sitting calmly beside him as if claiming her territory. Chen Ren leaned down, whispering, "What are you doing here?" The cat didn't bother looking at him. Instead, a voice echoed in his mind, startling him. "I came to observe you." Her tone was as calm and haughty as ever. "Although I don't think you're some demonic cultivator or a shapeshifter who needs to be eradicated, the pact still binds me to watch over you. And what better place than here?" Chen Ren blinked, momentarily taken aback by the fact that she could speak directly into his mind. Cultivation shenanigans, he thought to himself. Then, he merely shrugged and said, "You're free to stay. Besides, having a cat around might attract customers who would want to pat you." The cat shot him a withering glare, her ears twitching in irritation. "I'm a very accommodating and generous creature, but even I have my limits. Certain acts tempt me to burn down an entire city." Chen Ren felt his mouth widen in surprise, but he quickly gathered himself and raised an eyebrow, amused. What type of acts? Like the act of patting me. The cat's mental voice was sharp, like a dagger, her eyes narrowing as if daring him to test her words. Chen Ren stifled a laugh. Noted. He gave her a sideways glance, grateful he hadn't given in to his instincts last night and tried to pat her as he would any other street cat. Well, maybe in the future I might be able to, he thought, smiling.
Okay. That's the end of the video. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please be so gracious as to like the video. If you really enjoyed the video, you might even subscribe to the channel. Farewell, and good luck on your journey through life.